From a distance, it almost looks like every other night Dexter has spent in a kill room. Plastic, tools lined up with ritual precision. A man strapped to the table, begging, but this time, the most terrifying presence in the room isn't the victim. It's Harrison, standing just outside the door, seconds away from watching his father kill. In Dexter New Blood, when Dexter chooses to show Harrison his true nature, the code doesn't just bend, it fractures. Throughout his life, Dexter has insisted on one unbreakable rule: never harm the innocent, never let his dark passenger touch those he loves. Yet here he is, luring his own son into the ritual, inviting a teenager into the blood and plastic and knives. The kill on the table is one kind of horror. The choice to make Harrison part of it is another. Up until this point, the series has trained the audience to feel a twisted safety in Dexter's process. Harry's code promised boundaries. Only monsters. Only those who deserve it. Careful preparation, confirmed guilt, a clean disposal. The narration, the trophies, the slides, all conspired to present Dexter as a controlled predator, a dark solution to a broken justice system, rather than a chaotic killer hunting random victims. That illusion is what makes this night so disturbing. Because in Iron Lake, Dexter isn't just following the code, he is using it as a sales pitch. He explains the plastic. He explains the knives. He frames the kill as justice, as protection, as a legacy Harrison should inherit. The ritual that once kept his urges contained becomes a recruitment tool, and the line between guidance and corruption quietly disappears. This is the moment Dexter finally scares the audience, not with gore, but with recognition. The man who spent his entire life insisting he could separate his homicidal urges from his family is now letting those urges dictate what kind of father he will be. The code, created to protect a damaged child, is now being weaponized to damage another. In that instant, Dexter crosses a boundary he has been drawing in the sand since Harry first discovered the truth. The promise was always that his dark passenger would be confined to guilty targets, but inviting Harrison into the ritual shows that the real priority has never been justice. It has been Dexter's need to be seen, understood, and validated in his life as a killer, no matter the consequences. In this video, we're going to dive deep into how the series builds to this night, and why this would be the start of an event that changed how Dexter should be judged. Let's kick things off with a central question. When does a killer who believes he is following a moral code become indistinguishable from the predators he hunts? And did Dexter secretly cross that line long before this scene forced everyone to notice? In a series where Dexter's entire life is measured in bodies, it would be easy to assume the most terrifying moment is just the bloodiest one. But the scene we're building toward is different, because it quietly proves that the Bay Harbor Butcher was never a hero with a scalpel, only a predator who finally stopped pretending. Throughout his life, Dexter has killed dozens of people on screen, from cartel enforcers to serial rapists to elaborate monsters like Trinity. These are some of the most sadistic criminals in Miami, and the show spends seasons convincing the audience that their deaths are a brutal but necessary outlet for his urges. The plastic, the tools. The ritual all signal a familiar pattern. The code is being followed, the dark passenger is on a leash, the victims are guilty. The act at the center of this video breaks that pattern. It is not the most graphic kill. It is not the most inventive tableau. The horror comes from something colder, the realization that Dexter's internal brakes might finally be gone, that the voice saying no has been reduced to a whisper he can ignore whenever the craving to kill becomes too strong. Harry's code was never a moral philosophy. It was a damage control strategy designed for a traumatized child. Harry discovered early that Dexter's urges would not disappear, so he constructed rules to minimize collateral damage. No innocence. Solid evidence. Never get caught. For years, that framework lets the audience rationalize the violence. We tell ourselves that as long as the victims are predators, the line between justice and murder, while thin, still exists. But throughout his life, the series shows that line eroding. Dexter kills Brian not just to protect Deborah, but to keep his own double life intact. He lets Leela die when she becomes inconvenient, not because she fits the code. He manipulates Miguel Prado, then kills him when the Alliance threatens Dexter's control. Each exception is explained away in the moment, yet each one is a small fracture in Harry's design. By the time we reach the night in question, those fractures have widened into a fault line. Personal vendettas have crept in. Innocent people have been placed in danger purely because Dexter cannot stop hunting. There are scenes where he toys with the target's fear, drawing out the experience. And the narration makes it clear he is enjoying the kill more than he cares about any abstract idea of justice. The long-term effects of those choices are not just dead bodies, they are a self rewritten around addiction. That is why this act matters more than any other kill. It is the culmination of a slow erosion, the moment the code stops being a boundary and becomes a costume. The truth that emerges is terrifying. Given the right emotional trigger, Dexter will choose his urge to kill over any human connection. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how the show plants that outcome from the very beginning, tracing the breadcrumbs through childhood trauma, Harry's training, and the relationships that tried and failed to keep the dark passenger caged. If Dexter's worst act is choosing killing over connection, then Harry's code is the manual that makes that choice feel righteous instead of monstrous. To understand how terrifying Dexter can become, we're going to dive deep into the rulebook that was supposed to restrain him, and how it quietly trains him to believe his dark passenger is doing public service. Let's kick things off with the basics. Harry's code has 3 pillars: only kill those who are proven killers, never get caught, and let the justice system's failures decide who becomes prey. The courts let a murderer walk on a technicality? That is Dexter's green light. Evidence is shaky or circumstantial? The code says stand down. On the surface, it sounds almost principled, a crude vigilante ethic that separates Dexter from the predators he dismembers. Throughout his life, Dexter clings to this as both shield and leash. The code tells him his urges are not random, they are targeted. It tells him his victims are not people. They are monsters who slipped past the system. In his narration, he repeats Harry's lines like scripture, reassuring himself that every plastic-covered room is a courtroom, every knife stroke a verdict. This is how Dexter convinces himself he is different from the killers he studies in Bloodspatter at work. But the cracks start early, and they start with Harry. Harry does not just identify Dexter's urges, he covers for them. When young Dexter kills neighborhood animals, Harry hides the evidence instead of seeking real treatment. When Dexter stalks a nurse who is slowly poisoning Harry in the hospital, Harry does not stop him, he effectively gives permission. This would be the start of a pattern where the code is used to justify Dexter's rage, not extinguish it. We also see Harry bend his own rules. He teaches Dexter to manipulate crime scenes, to falsify reports, to weaponize his position inside law enforcement. The message is clear: the second rule, never get caught, is not about morality, it is about survival. If the choice is between preserving human life and preserving Dexter's secret, the code leans toward the secret every time. That is because the code is not a moral philosophy, it is a containment strategy. Harry is a cop who has lost faith in the system, staring at a child with urges he does not know how to cure. The code becomes his desperate compromise, a way to direct the killing away from innocence and toward those he believes deserve it. But containment strategies fail the moment emotion, obsession, or desperation enter the equation. As Dexter's life grows more complicated, the pressure on that containment grows with it. Love, family, professional risk, and personal vendettas all collide with the clean rules Harry imagined. The long-term effects of that tension are devastating. Every time Dexter bends the code for someone he cares about, he proves that the real authority is not Harry's voice, but his own desire. In the next section, we will trace the first moments when that desire openly overrides the code, setting the stage for his most terrifying choice. That open override does not happen in a vacuum. It grows out of a long, quiet slide from rules to rationalizations, where every small compromise makes the next one easier. Let's kick things off with Dexter's baseline. In the early seasons, he is almost obsessively meticulous. He stalks potential victims for weeks, cross-checks police files, confirms repeat offenses and unpunished murders. The code demands moral certainty and zero loose ends, so he double wraps his kill rooms in plastic, scrubs every trace of blood, and keeps those blood slides as a private record. Throughout his life as the Bay Harbor Butcher, this ritual is presented as discipline, a leash Harry left behind to keep the dark passenger contained. But then the first cracks appear. Early on, Dexter breaks into the house of the man who killed the boy in the choir, ready to kill purely from personal anger, only to realize he has no proof. He pulls back that time, but the impulse is important. Later, when Paul threatens Rita's fragile new life, Dexter frames him with heroin. That is not about the code. That is about convenience and self-protection, dressed up as justice. The pattern continues when he kills Jimenez, the man who murdered his mother. Harry's rules say avoid personal vendettas. Dexter's grief says otherwise. We're going to dive deep into those moments where the justification comes after the urge. With Brian, Dexter tells himself his brother cannot be allowed to live because he targets Deborah. With Lila, he frames her as an escalating threat who will always endanger his family. Both assessments have truth in them, but the timing matters. Dexter wants them dead first, then retrofits the narrative so they fit the code. The kill becomes inevitable in his mind, and the code becomes a script he reads from to calm himself. This would be the start of a much darker feedback loop. In addiction psychology, each time someone bends a personal rule and survives the consequences, the rule loses power. Dexter's inner monologue walks through the same process. He kills Miguel after helping him cross the line into murder, then tells himself he is restoring balance. He kills an innocent cameraman by mistake, then insists the real guilty party forced his hand. Every successful rationalization teaches his brain that the code is flexible, that the dark passenger can be indulged as long as the right story is told afterward. The long-term effects of that erosion are crucial for understanding his most terrifying act. By the time Dexter chooses a kill over any real human connection, the groundwork has been laid by years of these small exceptions. One particular rationalization early on plays almost like a rehearsal for that future decision, but its true significance will only be discovered when we return to it later in the series. In the next section, we will follow that rehearsal into the moment where Dexter's urge to kill finally outruns any version of Harry's code, and the consequences become impossible to frame as heroism. That moment, where the urge outruns the rule, only makes sense when Dexter is no longer framed as a dark hero at all, but as an addict chasing a very specific high. To see how terrifying his later choice really is, we're going to dive deep into the pleasure he takes long before the code breaks. On paper, Harry's code is about control and justice. In practice, Dexter treats it like a ritual delivery system for euphoria. The stalking comes first. We watch him linger outside a target's house, listening to their habits, savoring the anticipation. His voiceover doesn't sound like a cop building a case. It sounds like someone describing a craving finally about to be satisfied. The plastic, the tape, the carefully arranged trophies on the kill table all become part of a ceremony designed to heighten the moment when the knife goes in. Throughout his life, Dexter tells the audience that the dark passenger demands blood, yet the monologues circling his victims reveal something more self-indulgent. He talks about the peace that comes after a kill, the sense of being whole only when the ritual is complete. This would be the start of a pattern where the code looks less like a moral boundary and more like a justification he can hide behind, a way to live with what he already wants rather than a set of rules that created that desire in the first place. The series is honest about this in flashes. Dexter openly reflects that Harry did not give him the urges, Harry only redirected them. When he explains the code to partners like Miguel or procs like Zach, the language slips. He insists the victims must deserve it, yet he also admits the code keeps him from getting caught, keeps his life intact, keeps the supply of kills flowing. Justice is the sales pitch. Survival and satisfaction are the real product. That's why disappointment creeps in when justice arrives without him. A suspect is arrested cleanly. A rival killer takes out someone Dexter has been tracking, or fate removes a target before the table is ready. The reaction is not relief that a dangerous person is gone. It is frustration that the opportunity has vanished. The audience sees it in the way his narration tightens, in the quiet resentment when someone else steals his kill. The loss is not moral, it is experiential. Once the kill becomes emotional relief, the line between "they deserve it" and "I need this" grows dangerously thin. The long-term effects of that shift are devastating. Every time Dexter chooses the hunt over honest connection, the addiction deepens, and the consequences for the people around him escalate. By the time he reaches the most terrifying act of his life, the truth is already clear. The code is no longer in charge. The need is. And when that need finally collides with someone who does not fit Harry's code at all, Dexter's inner voice offers the most chilling confession of all. Without a kill, he cannot breathe. The question becomes, in that moment, who is really safe from a man who believes his survival depends on someone else's blood? That belief has a cost, and it is almost never paid by Dexter himself. It is paid by everyone standing near the blast radius of his secret life. Throughout his life, Dexter talks about the code as if it is a moral firewall, a set of rules that keeps innocents safe while the dark passenger hunts only monsters. But when we are going to dive deep into the actual pattern of events, a harsher truth is discovered. The people who suffer most are not the chosen victims, but the bystanders who never consented to be part of his war. Let's kick things off with Rita. From the very beginning, Dexter chooses her precisely because she is damaged, passive, and unlikely to ask questions. That choice alone is chilling. His double life pulls her into the orbit of the ice truck killer, into Brian's twisted family tableau, and eventually into the crosshairs of Trinity. Dexter underestimates Arthur Mitchell, assumes he can compartmentalize the hunt, and then comes home to an event that changed everything: Rita dead in the bathtub, Harrison crying in her blood. This is not a criminal punished by the code. This is collateral damage created by Dexter's need to keep killing while playing house. The same pattern plays out with Deborah. Harry's choice to channel rather than cure Dexter's urges already put Deb on a collision course with horror, but Dexter accelerates it. He drags her to crime scenes shaped by his own handiwork, lies to her face about the Bay Harbor butcher, and then, in a moment of sheer arrogance, lets her walk in on him about to kill Travis Marshall. Deb's near death in the church fire, her psychological collapse, and eventually her brain death after LaGuerta's murder all flow from Dexter's conviction that he can manage every variable. He cannot. The long-term effects of that one secret annihilate her career, her sense of self, and finally her life. Even more minor figures are treated as acceptable risks. Astor and Cody are repeatedly left exposed while Dexter chases leads. Harrison is kidnapped more than once because enemies use Dexter's family as leverage. Rita's neighbor Sylvia, the innocents on the yacht where Lila sets the fire, the bystanders in the Hurricane Laura cover up in new blood. Again and again, Dexter's world erupts outward, burning whoever happens to be standing nearby. None of these people were selected by Harry's code. They were selected by proximity, by being useful alibis, emotional cover, or leverage against a man who refuses to stop feeding his addiction. That is what makes their suffering uniquely disturbing. They are not part of his ritual. They are the debris. Each close call should have been a siren in Dexter's head that the code does not protect innocence at all. Instead, it functions as a story he tells himself so he can keep going. And when one particular innocent finally becomes the direct test of whether he values a human life more than a kill, Dexter's answer will strip away whatever illusion remains about who he really is. And that illusion does not just live in Dexter's head. It lives in the people who stand closest to him, the ones who build their entire emotional reality around the belief that he is damaged but safe. Let's kick things off with Dexter Morgan, the person who arguably loves Dexter more fiercely than anyone else in his life. Throughout his life, Deborah is the loyal, foul-mouthed sister who defines herself as the protector and the one person who will never abandon him. She knows he is emotionally shut down, knows he is distant with Rita, knows he disappears at strange hours, but she files all of it under trauma, not monstrosity. In her mind, Dexter is a good man hurt by a brutal past, not a predator guided by a code. Deborah's entire identity is wrapped around that assumption. She grows up envying how Harry seemed to favor Dexter, then spends adulthood trying to earn that same trust while believing Dexter is the one truly in need. When she vents about her own failures, it is often framed against Dexter's supposed quiet strength. The long-term effects of this dynamic are devastating. When the truth is finally discovered, it is not just that she learns he kills. It is that her entire understanding of her family, Harry, and her own loyalty collapses in a single emotional freefall. If Deborah is the emotional core, Rita Bennett is the symbol of Dexter's attempted normal life. From the beginning, Dexter chooses Rita precisely because she appears too fragile and traumatized to notice his darkness. She is recovering from an abusive ex, terrified of conflict, focused on her children and basic safety. To Dexter, that makes her the perfect cover. He can play the gentle boyfriend, then husband, while sneaking out to satisfy his urges with carefully selected victims. Over time, though, Rita genuinely falls in love with the man she believes Dexter to be, shy, patient, almost saint-like in his tolerance. Their home, their kids, even baby Harrison become visual proof that the code has created something almost wholesome. When the most terrifying act arrives, the horror lands partly because we remember how deliberately he walked into that house, knowing exactly what she did not see. Around them, colleagues like Batista and Masuka complete the mask. At Miami Metro, Dexter is the odd but harmless blood spatter guy, the one who brings donuts, helps on cases, and never causes drama. Batista sees him as steady and decent, a quiet anchor in a chaotic department. Masuka jokes about Dexter's lack of social skills, but it reassures him. Dexter is safe enough to tease, not a man with a dark passenger. Their perception matters. It shows that Harry's code does not just hide a killer, it creates a version of Dexter that comforts everyone around him. And that is why the most terrifying thing Dexter ever does is not only about the act itself, it is about how violently it collides with these stories, forcing Debra, Rita's legacy, Harrison, and everyone else to confront a truth that cannot coexist with the man they thought they knew. The next moment does not just spill blood. It detonates belief. Belief detonates once. What follows for Debra is the slow collapse of every defense mechanism that ever protected her from the truth about Dexter. Let's kick things off with the early fractures. Throughout his life, Dexter has been a master at disappearing at the exact moment a body is discovered, arriving on scenes with an almost supernatural sense of timing, and reacting to carnage with clinical calm. Debra is used to him being emotionally flat, but as the Bay Harbor butcher case tightens around Miami Metro, those habits stop looking like quirks and start looking like clues. She notices the late nights, the missing explanations, the way his blood guy expertise always seems to orbit the worst killers in the city. This would be the start of Debra's awakening. The ice truck killer targeting her, Brian's connection to Dexter, Harry's secret visits to a child therapist, all plant a seed that there is a version of Dexter she has never met. Still, denial is powerful. As long as the evidence remains circumstantial, she can file away the discomfort as stress, coincidence, or just Dexter being Dexter. Then comes an event that changed denial into impossibility. In the church with Travis Marshall, the doomsday killer, Debra walks in and literally sees Dexter mid-ritual. Plastic, knives, a terrified victim bound to the altar. She watches her brother drive a blade into Travis's heart. There is no convenient narrative, no way to recast this as an arrest gone wrong. The mask slips in one brutal motion, and the dark passenger she never believed in is suddenly standing in front of her, covered in blood. From that second on, Debra is trapped in psychological whiplash. The man who held her while she cried over failed relationships, who helped her chase her detective ambitions, is also a meticulous serial killer who has spent years selecting victims, preparing kill rooms, and following a code that Harry never told her about. Her brain races to reconcile holiday dinners with dismemberment, inside jokes with blood slides. Was every comforting moment genuine, or just excellent camouflage? We're going to dive deep into how the show frames this as more than simple shock. Debra is not just horrified by the kills. She is horrified by her own complicity in retrospect. Every time she defended Dexter, every time she praised his loyalty, now feels like an alibi she unknowingly provided for the Bay Harbor butcher. The long-term effects of that realization are devastating. Panic attacks, moral paralysis, and a creeping awareness that Harry's code did not protect the family. It weaponized one member against everyone else. Once Debra knows, the stakes of Dexter's urges change forever. Every future choice he makes is no longer just about whether a target deserves to die. It is about what he is willing to do in front of the one person who truly sees him, and what she is willing to live with. When she later watches him prepare another kill, eyes harder, movements more automatic, the question is no longer, is Dexter a monster? It becomes, how far will that monster go when the last witness will not look away? The most terrifying act still lies ahead, and it will force Debra into an even more impossible position than watching him plunge the knife into Travis Marshall. Deb has seen the blade. She has watched Dexter kill. But the most disturbing part is that life keeps moving forward around that secret. Bills, breakfasts, and bedtime stories now share space with plastic wrap and kill rooms. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated relationships as camouflage, a way to appear normal while the dark passenger does its work. Rita is the first major test of whether that can change. She is fragile, traumatized, and visibly afraid of violence, which makes her the safest possible partner for a man hiding lethal urges. At first, Dexter leans into that safety. Her boundaries give him a ready-made excuse for distance, and the code seems compatible with domestic life. But as he keeps killing, the question becomes whether Rita's safety is a priority, or just another variable in his double life. Let's kick things off with one of the earliest cracks. Dexter lies to Rita constantly to protect his rituals, vanishing on work emergencies while she manages the children alone. When Paul, her abusive ex, re-enters the picture, Dexter has a clear chance to truly prioritize her. Instead, he frames Paul, sends him back to prison, and walks away believing the problem is solved. The long-term effects of that choice are brutal. Paul dies, Rita never learns the truth about Dexter's manipulation, and the pattern is set. Rather than sacrifice the hunt, Dexter rearranges other people's lives around it. Then Harrison is born, and the stakes change completely. This is no longer about a girlfriend who does not know the truth. Dexter is now a father to a child who, like him, was found crying in blood. The series leans hard into the echo of the shipping container, an event that changed Dexter and Brian forever. Dexter promises himself that Harrison will not be born in blood the way he was, that the darkness will stop with him. On paper, that sounds like growth. In practice, it becomes another pressure point. We're going to dive deep into those pressure points, because they show that love does not tame Dexter, it traps him. Time and again, he chooses the hunt over family obligations. He skips Harrison's milestones to stalk Arthur Mitchell. He leaves Rita alone on what should be a celebratory trip so he can chase the Trinity Killer's secrets. Even date nights become staging areas for surveillance. Each choice looks justified in the moment, framed as necessary to protect future victims. But the pattern is unmistakable. When the dark passenger calls, even love is negotiable. This would be the start of a dangerous compression. Harry's code was designed for a solitary predator, not a husband, brother, and father, balancing car seats with kill tools. As Debra closes in on the truth, as Rita and Harrison unknowingly orbit his secrets, Dexter's double life is squeezed into a tighter and tighter space. There is less room for careful planning, more overlap between family and victims, and less emotional distance from the consequences. The inevitable outcome is not tranquility, but rupture. By the time that rupture comes, it will not be triggered by a stranger on a table. It will erupt at the exact point where Dexter's roles as killer, brother, and father collide in the worst possible way, proving that the most terrifying act is not just how he kills, but what he is finally willing to sacrifice to keep killing. That sacrifice brings us to the one line Dexter believes he will never cross. The most terrifying act in his entire story does not begin with a knife. It begins with a belief that as long as he never kills an innocent person, he is not a monster, but a necessary evil. Throughout his life, Dexter repeats this almost like a prayer. Harry's code is not just about avoiding prison or hiding the dark passenger. It is anchored to a single moral claim: the victims deserve it. He tracks them, confirms their crimes, and only then allows himself to kill. Without that distinction, there is no difference between Dexter and the men on his table. There is no justification, no narrative where his existence can be tolerated. The series keeps reinforcing how sacred that line is. We're going to dive deep into how often the show makes Dexter stop, hesitate, or walk away when innocence is even a possibility. Early on, Harry drills into him that a mistake is unacceptable, an event that changed the way Dexter approaches every potential target. If the evidence is thin, he backs off. If a supposed predator turns out to be a victim, he lets them go. The ritual of collecting proof is not just procedure, it is his last remaining claim to being anything other than a predator who kills for pleasure. Across multiple seasons, we see this in action. Dexter abandons hunts when an alibi checks out. He re-examines crime scenes, revisits files, and even calls off a kill mid-process when new truth is discovered. Each time, the show underlines that this is the line in the sand Harry left him with. Break the secrecy rule, and the consequences are legal. Break the innocence rule, and the consequences are existential. That same rule quietly comforts the audience. It creates a twisted moral framework where rooting for Dexter feels possible. He is a killer, but at least he is killing killers. The code gives a narrative leash. As long as the victims are confirmed monsters, the dark passenger can be rebranded as a brutal form of justice. The audience does not have to face the full horror of what it would mean if he ever turned that knife towards someone who did not deserve it. Let's kick things off with a hard truth. This comfort is fragile. The show keeps placing Dexter in scenarios where protecting that rule comes at a personal cost, forcing a choice between the people in his life and the purity of the code. Each time he chooses the hunt, the line erodes a little more. That erosion is crucial. Because the most terrifying thing Dexter ever does is not necessarily a completed kill. It is the moment he walks right up to the edge of betraying this core promise to Harry, to himself, and to us. We are about to watch him stand over someone who absolutely does not deserve to die, and feel the dark passenger lean in. How he gets there, and what he chooses in that instant, is where the real horror lives. That edge only exists because the code has already been twisted into something it was never meant to be. Harry designed it as a leash, a desperate way to contain a child's urges to kill. But throughout his life, Dexter slowly learns that a leash can also be a weapon. And once that happens, every threat to his secrecy starts to look like a target. Let's kick things off with one of the clearest breaks, the decision to kill Miguel Prado's brother-in-law, Ethan, on paper. Ethan is a domestic abuser, an easy fit for the code. In practice, Dexter is cornered. Miguel has discovered his method, is pushing to participate. And Ethan becomes a test subject to keep Miguel loyal and controllable. The kill is framed as righteous, but the timing gives it away. This is self-preservation dressed up as justice. We see the same pattern with Leela. She is not a serial killer. She is dangerous, manipulative, and obsessed. But her greatest crime in Dexter's eyes is that she discovered the truth and will not let go. When he tracks her to Paris and kills her, the code is barely a fig leaf. He can point to arson and murder, yet the emotional core of that scene is revenge and cleanup, eliminating the one person who knows too much and refuses to worship the version of Dexter he wants to present. This would be the start of the most disturbing trend. The victims shift from predators of society to predators of Dexter's double life. Dokes, framed and destroyed. Leela, executed abroad. Miguel himself, once he becomes uncontrollable. Each time, Dexter narrates a justification, highlighting a rule they broke, a life they took, a line they crossed. Yet the real non-negotiable is always the same. They endanger the secret, and the secret must survive. We're going to dive deep into how familiar this logic feels. In the real world, moral codes are often weaponized exactly this way. People start with clear principles, then gradually carve out exceptions whenever those principles become inconvenient or personally costly. Dexter's inner monologue walks us through that process in real time, turning the audience into witnesses as the code mutates from restraint into permission. If he can technically fit someone under a rule, then the dark passenger gets to eat. By the time new blood arrives, the escalation is complete. Harrison's therapist, Angela's investigation. Even Harrison himself become potential problems to be solved rather than lives to be protected. The code has been sharpened into a blade that can point anywhere Dexter needs it to. And that is what makes the upcoming moments so terrifying. Standing over someone who does not meet his old criteria at all, Dexter silently measures them against this corrupted system. For a breath, the dark passenger argues that the code allows it. The knife hovers, the justification forms, and we cut away before the choice is clear. In that cutaway, the knife is still suspended in imagination. On this night, it's about to come down in reality. And the gap between those two moments is where Dexter finally stops being the controlled experiment Harry designed and becomes something much harder to defend. Let's kick things off with the specific pressure point he's facing. At this stage of his life, Dexter is hunting an antagonist who is not just another predator in Miami. This target is entwined with his family, his work, and his carefully curated identity. They have discovered enough of the truth to be genuinely dangerous, and they are reckless enough to use it. What began as another name on a table has turned into an escalating feud, with each move dragging more innocent people into the blast radius. Externally, the vis is closing. The department's Bay Harbor Butcher Task Force has quietly reawakened. Old evidence is being re-examined, and those blood slide patterns that once felt like trophies now look like a noose. Deborah's questions have shifted from, "Are you okay?" to, "What are you hiding?" Meanwhile, other enemies, people who have seen Dexter in the wrong place at the wrong time, are circling, trading fragments of suspicion. Every new lie forces three more, shrinking his margin for error to almost nothing. Throughout his life, Dexter relied on the code to separate his urges from everyone he claimed to love. On this night, that separation collapses. He rushes surveillance, misreads timelines, and walks into scenes without his usual preparation. We start to hear it in his inner monologue. Less dry analysis, more clipped, almost breathless justifications. The dark passenger is no longer a quiet commentator. It is shouting over Harry's voice, demanding immediate action, demanding a kill to relieve the pressure. This would be the start of a frightening pattern. Dexter follows the antagonist while half distracted by texts from Deborah, calls from the station, and the constant awareness that any traffic stop, any random patrol car, could expose him. He cuts corners on the ritual. The plastic is sloppy. The background check is incomplete. There are lingering doubts about guilt that, in earlier seasons, would have sent him back to the evidence board. Now they are brushed aside as inconvenient. Psychologically, this is an event that changed how the audience should feel about his control. The narration leans on the old language of justice, but the images betray him. He toys with the target longer than necessary, drawing out fear, savoring the power in a way that has nothing to do with protecting future victims and everything to do with feeding an addiction. The code becomes a retroactive alibi, not a real constraint. By the time the night fully closes in, Dexter is no longer the cold, calculating predator from Season 1. He is cornered, desperate, and therefore more dangerous than ever. Every external pressure, police scrutiny, loved ones closing in, enemies pressing their advantage, funnels toward a single, catastrophic choice. We're going to dive deep into that choice next, but for now it is enough to feel the dread. This is the moment where trusting Dexter's control becomes a mistake. Cornered Dexter is dangerous, but cornered Dexter with an innocent alone in front of him is something else entirely. This is the scene where the Bay Harbor butcher mask almost slips for good, and the code becomes a technicality instead of a line he will not cross. Let's kick things off with the setup. Rita has just discovered Dexter's secret heroin stash, the fake addiction he created to hide his nocturnal hunting. She is hurt, angry, and determined not to be lied to again. In response, Dexter does what he always does when the walls close in. He isolates the problem. He invites her to an empty house he is supposedly buying, a quiet, echoing space with no neighbors, no witnesses, and a lock he controls. Throughout his life, Dexter has brought guilty victims into rooms like this. Here, for one of the only times in the series, the person walking in is completely innocent, and that innocence is exactly what makes the moment so chilling. Rita is alone with a man she trusts, in a half-renovated room with exposed beams, bare floors, and wide plastic sheeting covering the windows to keep dust out. To her, it is a home in progress. To Dexter's dark passenger, it might as well be a kill room waiting to be finished. The blocking is precise. Dexter positions Rita with her back to the plastic, framing her in that translucent sheet while he stands between her and the door. His body language is calm on the surface, but his hands are too still, his shoulders too squared. The internal narration gives away the truth. He catalogs exits, calculates angles, and notes that one decisive move would end the argument forever. The show lets the thought land without melodrama. Killing her would solve this. Permanently, we're going to dive deep into that hesitation, because it is not immediate horror at the idea of killing an innocent. It is a cost-benefit analysis. Dexter considers the code, Harry's rules about never harming someone who does not deserve it, and then weighs that against exposure, prison, losing his life as a family man. For a few suspended seconds, the scales are not obviously in Rita's favor. The camera pushes in on Dexter's face as his eyes go flat, the same dead focus seen with bound victims. The environment makes it unmistakable that he could do it. No furniture, no witnesses, a toolbox nearby with duct tape, rope, and knives. Plastic already hung. His physical advantage over Rita is overwhelming. This is not a hypothetical danger the audience imagines. The scene is staged like a prelude to murder. The precise instant of terror comes when Dexter steps closer, and the narration admits he is genuinely considering it, that the easiest way to protect his secret might be to kill the woman who loves him. This would be the start of a new Dexter, one who kills for convenience rather than any twisted interpretation of justice. The moment passes, he pulls back, and he chooses confession over execution. But the long-term effects of that near choice are devastating, because the audience has now discovered the truth. The only barrier between Rita and the table was a fleeting decision. In the next section, we freeze that decision and ask whether what stopped him actually makes him less terrifying, or proves the code was always an excuse. If the last section exposed how close Rita came to dying, this is where we're going to dive deep into why that almost happened at all. Because when the camera lingers on Dexter's face, and the inner narration goes quiet for just a beat, the horror is not the knife he almost raises, it is the calculation happening behind his eyes. Let's kick things off with that expression. His jaw is tight, but not shaking. His breathing is controlled. The voiceover doesn't sound like a man in moral crisis, it sounds like a technician running diagnostics. Dexter weighs angles, timing, cleanup. The questions in his head are not should Rita die, but can this be contained? And what happens if it is not? The framing turns his internal monologue into a flowchart, not a confession. Throughout his life, Dexter has described his emotions as imitation, a performance built to keep the dark passenger hidden. In this moment, that performance flickers. When Rita confronts him with the truth she has discovered, the first flash in his eyes is not guilt, it is alertness, predator focus. The series shows a man whose mind instantly jumps to Harry's code as logistics. No witnesses, no exposure, no loose ends. The conflict, such as it is, comes from competing forms of self-preservation, not competing moral values. The more he thinks, the clearer his priorities become. His thoughts move to the police, to Deborah, to his son, not as independent lives with their own worth, but as concentric circles of fallout that will close in on him if Rita talks. The imagined consequences are career destruction, prison, losing access to his child, losing the life that cushions his urges. Even when family enters the calculation, it is framed as what Dexter stands to lose, not what they stand to suffer. The life in front of him is one variable among many, not a sacred line he refuses to cross. And yet, there is another layer that makes this an event that changed how the audience reads every later kill. There is a flicker of relief at the idea of removing the threat, a subtle relaxation in his shoulders, when the possibility of silencing Rita becomes concrete. The scene implies that, on some level, eliminating a person who knows too much would not just protect him, it would scratch the same itch every other kill scratches. The dark passenger does not care that she is innocent. It only recognizes opportunity. That is where the enjoyment seeps in, almost invisibly. The ritual planning begins in his head, the table, the plastic, the familiar choreography that has always brought him a sense of order. For a second, the prospect of another solution feels easier than confession, easier than change. This would be the start of Dexter finally admitting, at least internally, that the code was never about justice. It was about feeding an addiction under rules that made it feel righteous. The terror of this scene lies in how small morality actually is in his decision tree. Harry's code appears only as a procedural manual, not a conscience. What ultimately stops him is not a sudden surge of empathy, but a different self-interested calculation that confession might better preserve his long-term cover and access to the life he has built. The long-term effects of this realization are devastating, and in the next section, we test a disturbing idea that Dexter's most merciful choices may be the most selfish of all. That merciful choice in the interrogation room sets the tone for what comes next, because the near kill that follows rips away any illusion that Dexter is safely contained by Harry's code. This is where we're going to dive deep into the exact second his restraint fails, and the equally chilling second it snaps back into place. Let's kick things off with the trigger. Dexter has his almost victim isolated, the scene framed like any other ritual. Plastic, tools, that quiet, practiced confidence. The difference is that this person does not fit the pattern. The evidence is thin, the guilt ambiguous, but Dexter's urges are louder than his doubts. He raises the blade, fully committed, and what stops him is not morality. It is an interruption. A phone buzzes. Harrison's name flashes. In a single cut, the dark passenger is forced to share the frame with the life Dexter claims to value. The moment is small, but the psychology is enormous. Dexter freezes, not because he suddenly feels empathy for the person on the table, but because the call reminds him of consequences. Harrison, Deborah, the fragile, normal life he has constructed, all hang in the balance if this kill turns out to be a mistake. The retreat is tactical. It is a last-second adherence to the external shell of Harry's code, driven by fear of losing his cover, not by concern for innocent victims. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated moments like this as proof that he is not a monster. He walks away and narrates it as growth, as control, as evidence that Harry's lessons worked. He tells himself that choosing not to kill is the same as choosing to care. But the audience has just watched how close that blade came to skin. The distance between innocent person and disappeared body was a single phone vibration, a circumstantial distraction that could easily have not happened. This is what makes the scene so quietly terrifying. The code does not appear as a deeply rooted moral framework. It appears as a thin, procedural checklist that can be overridden until something external snaps Dexter back. He almost kills, then retrofits a narrative of restraint onto what was really a near catastrophe. The truth discovered in that gap is that his so-called mercy is dependent on accidents. By the end of this arc, the most terrifying thing Dexter ever did was not just almost killing an innocent person. It was showing that the only barrier between that person and death was a fragile, circumstantial impulse, a ringtone, a memory of Harrison's face, a sudden fear of being caught. This would be the start of an event that changed how the audience reads every later choice Dexter makes. Because now every hesitation looks less like conscience and more like calculation. In the next sections, we track the long-term effects of this moment, as Deborah and others finally see how close he is to becoming the unrestrained killer Harry always feared, and how this brush with disaster accelerates Dexter's final downfall. That brush with disaster only makes sense when placed against the original promise of Harry's rules. At the beginning, the code is presented as a cage. Harry designs it to protect the innocent, to keep Dexter from getting caught, and to focus those killing urges only on victims who deserve it. Throughout his life, Dexter repeats those pillars like commandments, a way to believe this isn't pure predation but a controlled, almost ethical outlet for the dark passenger. But over time, that cage starts to look more like armor. The language shifts. Instead of Harry wouldn't want this, Dexter begins to say, Harry would understand. That subtle rewrite turns a hard boundary into a negotiation. The code stops being an external law and becomes a flexible story he tells himself, so he can live with the truth of what he already wants to do. Let's kick things off with a mid-series moment that exposes this pivot, Dexter's relationship with Miguel Prado in Season 3. On paper, the code should scream danger. Miguel is volatile, ambitious, and obsessed with using Dexter's methods for his own agenda. Harry's rules are clear about avoiding unnecessary exposure, avoiding partners, and never killing for personal gain. Yet Dexter ignores all of that because Miguel offers something intoxicating, admiration and shared darkness. Watch how Dexter narrates this slide. When Miguel suggests killing Ellen Wolfe, a defense attorney who frees criminals, Dexter knows she does not meet the code's standard. There is no clear proof she is a killer, no direct evidence that she personally harms people. His first instinct is I shouldn't. Then the monologue twists. Maybe Harry was too rigid, maybe this is an evolution, maybe the code can expand. By the time Ellen is on the table, Dexter is not being guided by the code. He is cherry-picking fragments of it to rationalize a kill he already wants in order to keep Miguel close and maintain control. This would be the start of a pattern. Whenever emotions are involved, protecting Deborah, punishing Lila, managing Miguel, Dexter's inner voice moves from restraint to justification. Instead of asking whether a potential victim truly fits Harry's criteria, he asks whether he can frame them as fitting it. The question is, no longer do they deserve to die, but can Harry's code be stretched until they do? We're going to dive deep into why that psychological pivot matters so much. Once the code becomes negotiable, it stops functioning as a moral break and turns into a legal brief for the defense. Every urge can be argued into compliance. Every impulse can be dressed up in Harry's language. And if any kill can be made to sound like justice after the fact, then there is no real limit at all. That is the terrifying doorway this era of Dexter's life opens. When the code is no longer a wall but a mirror he angles to see what he wants, the path is clear for an act that technically fits his rules, yet shatters any illusion that he is saving anyone. In the next section, the focus shifts to the night he finally steps through that doorway, and proves how far he will bend Harry's legacy before it snaps completely.
When the code becomes a mirror, the next question is simple and chilling. What happens when the reflection includes everyone else in the room? This is where Dexter's addiction stops being a private bargain and starts turning innocent lives into background noise. Let's kick things off with one of the clearest examples of that shift. Dexter stalking Travis Marshall through the crowd at the Miami Metro Homicide Department's public dedication ceremony at the end of Season 6. Families, reporters, officers' kids, and dignitaries pack the building while banners celebrate law and order. In the middle of that, Dexter is not thinking about security protocols or evacuation routes. He's thinking about how to get Travis alone long enough to kill him. Throughout his life, Dexter supposedly followed Harry's rule to never risk getting caught. Yet here, he deliberately hunts his target in a place where one wrong move means a mass casualty event. He knows Travis is armed. He knows Travis believes in apocalyptic spectacle. The internal narration walks through it like a math problem. Entrances, exits, potential blind spots, how long it would take to subdue him before anyone notices. Human lives become variables in a private equation between Dexter and his dark passenger. The series lets that calculation play out in real time. Sirens begin to wail outside. Officers shout orders as rumors of a threat ripple through the crowd. Parents grab their children. People trip over chairs and drop phones in the rush to escape. Dexter, by contrast, moves with eerie calm, narrating angles and timing while the camera cuts between his focused face and the chaos he is courting. The contrast makes the truth impossible to ignore. His sense of control is an illusion built on everyone else's terror. This would be the start of Dexter accepting that a few innocents might get hurt is an acceptable cost, as long as the kill goes through. When Travis slips away toward the roof, Dexter follows, knowing that any confrontation up there risks gunfire, falling debris, even bodies hitting the pavement below. The moral frame has inverted. Instead of asking how to protect the crowd, he asks how to isolate his victim without losing the chance to satisfy his urges. Harry's code was meant to prevent exactly this moment, but the long-term effects of tying morality to successful killing are on full display. Once the only question is, can Dexter get away with it? Everyone in proximity becomes collateral. The predator and protector roles merge into a single, self-serving identity. And if he is willing to run that risk in a building full of strangers, how long before the blast radius comfortably includes the people he claims to love most? In the next section, we're going to dive deep into the night. That question finally gets an answer, and why that answer is the most terrifying act of Dexter's entire life. That answer begins on a kill table where Dexter finally stops pretending this is about balance and lets the pleasure show. Throughout his life, Dexter has framed his kills as grim maintenance work, a bloody chore demanded by the dark passenger and managed by Harry's code. But when he takes Travis Marshall, the Doomsday Killer, to that abandoned rooftop at the end of Season 6, the mask slips. There is no rush to save a future victim, no frantic race against the clock. There is only Dexter, his captive, and an almost serene anticipation. Let's kick things off with Dexter's body language. As he wraps Travis in plastic, the camera lingers on his face. His breathing is slow, almost meditative. The tight, anxious jaw that usually appears when he kills is gone. Instead, there's a small, unmistakable smile as he lays out the knives. His internal narration doesn't talk about Trinity, Rita, or the long-term effects of letting another killer roam free. It talks about completion, about finally finishing the tableau that has been haunting his imagination. The staging of that kill room feels less like a crime scene and more like an artist's studio. Dexter has recreated a twisted version of Travis's own apocalyptic imagery, but the care in the plastic, the deliberate positioning of the body, and the way he adjusts the tools on the table tell a different truth. This is enjoyment. This is craft. Every movement is measured, not because he fears getting caught, but because he wants the experience to be perfect. Crucially, Dexter barely thinks about Travis's crimes. Earlier episodes hammered home the victims, the religious delusions, the public terror. Here, on the rooftop, those details fade into background noise. His narration does not catalog the dead. It fixates on how right it feels to finally act. The code is technically satisfied, but emotionally, it is irrelevant. The pleasure is the point. This would be the start of a more honest Dexter, and that honesty is terrifying. When he leans in, eyes bright, and tells Travis he was wrong about the world ending, there is no moral lecture. There is satisfaction. He plunges the knife not with reluctant necessity, but with a fluid, almost graceful motion that the direction emphasizes in slow, lingering cuts. The camera holds on Dexter's face after the kill, letting the audience watch the afterglow. In that moment, everyone else in his life becomes an accessory to this feeling. If the real goal is the high, then Harry's code is just a safety harness he can unclip whenever it gets in the way. Rita, Deborah, Harrison, even the innocent bystanders of Miami all become potential collateral if they threaten his access to that pleasure. And in the next section, we're going to dive deep into the night he finally proves it, when the urge to feel this again outweighs every bond, every promise, and every illusion that he was ever a hero. And that brings us back to the only real line Dexter ever pretends is non-negotiable. Deborah Morgan. Throughout his life, Deborah isn't just his foul-mouthed little sister or a convenient alibi. She is the human shield Harry wraps around Dexter's darkness, the person the code silently designates as untouchable. Harry can accept criminals as victims. He can accept a son who needs to kill, but he cannot accept that son ever letting the dark passenger brush against Deborah. In Harry's mind, protecting her is the last shred of morality holding this entire experiment together. Let's kick things off with the basics of that dynamic. As kids, Deborah worships Harry while Dexter studies him. Deborah learns to chase criminals, Dexter learns to kill them. She absorbs the surface lessons about justice. Dexter absorbs the hidden lessons about the code. Without ever knowing the truth, Deborah becomes his conscience by proxy, the living reminder of what a real cop looks like, and the person he imagines Harry judging him through. We're going to dive deep into the moments where that bond actually restrains him. When Brian Moser targets Deborah, Dexter's choice is absolute: kill his own brother rather than let Deborah die. Later, when Dokes closes in, Dexter could eliminate the threat directly. Instead, he hesitates, stalls, tries to frame Dokes rather than murder him in cold blood, because any scandal around Dexter would drag Deborah down with him. Even in smaller beats, like delaying a hunt because Deborah is in danger on a case, the pattern is clear. Up to a point, her safety outranks his urges. But the long-term effects of living that double life around her are corrosive. As Dexter's lies stack up, Deborah's instincts sharpen. She notices his disappearances, his flat reactions to trauma, the way crime scenes with dismembered bodies never really rattle him. Her emotional investment is total. She wants him to be happy, wants to believe in his goodness, and later, in one of the show's most uncomfortable turns, wants a deeper connection that blurs familial lines. The more she needs him, the more there is to lose if she ever discovers what he really is. This would be the start of a new kind of tension. It's no longer just will Dexter get caught, it becomes can Dexter keep Deborah outside his world without destroying her in the process? Every close call, every half-truth, every time she stands in front of him at a crime scene, unknowingly defending the Bay Harbor butcher, tightens that psychological noose. So when the series edges toward the night his darkest act puts Deborah directly in the blast radius, the horror isn't only about a potential kill. It's about identity. If Dexter ever lets the dark passenger endanger Deborah to satisfy an urge, that isn't a simple broken rule. That is an event that changed the definition of Dexter Morgan, from damaged vigilante to someone willing to sacrifice the one person Harry built the code to protect. And in the next section, we watch that collapse begin in real time. That collapse doesn't start with a single kill. It starts with a way of thinking. Throughout his life, Dexter has been rehearsing one mental trick that makes the most terrifying act possible. He puts on a lab coat in his own head and turns horror into data. Dexter doesn't just feel urges, he narrates them. In voiceover, he describes his dark passenger like a researcher observing a specimen, cataloging hunger, adrenaline, and ritual as if they belong to someone else. When he watches a future victim, the language is clinical, patterns, opportunities, variables. That detached commentary creates emotional distance, letting him talk about wanting to kill as if he is writing a case study instead of planning a murder. Let's kick things off with how he tracks his own violence. From the very beginning, Dexter treats his life as an ongoing experiment. He counts the kills, refines the methods, and stores trophies in labeled blood slides like a lab archive. Each new victim becomes another data point that proves the code works, that Harry's rules keep chaos contained. By turning real bodies into a measurable pattern, he numbs the consequences. The more organized the system, the easier it is to pretend this isn't about pleasure, only about process. We're going to dive deep into a moment where that mindset becomes genuinely chilling. In Season 2, when Dokes closes in and the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation tightens, Dexter chooses to keep killing. He frames one of those kills as testing the limits of the code under pressure. The target technically qualifies, but the timing is reckless. He knows surveillance is growing. He knows any mistake could expose Deborah and his colleagues, and yet he proceeds, fascinated by whether the ritual can survive under maximum risk. This isn't justice. It is a scientist pushing a hypothesis, using a human life to see how far the experiment can stretch before it breaks. Harry's code was designed to control urges, not to justify trial runs. But Dexter slowly flips that logic. Each successful test becomes proof that the dark passenger can be indulged without cost. This would be the start of a deeper addiction in a lab coat, where the thrill of getting away with it merges with the thrill of the kill itself. The long-term effects of that mindset are devastating, because the more he survives, the more he believes survival is evidence that he was right all along. By the time he reaches the most terrifying act, that internal researcher has been training for years. He has practiced translating fear into variables, turning every close call into a result rather than a warning. So when an unthinkable line appears, he doesn't experience it as a moral cliff. He experiences it as the next inevitable data point. In the next section, we'll see how that habit finally collides with someone he cannot reduce to a slide or a statistic, and what happens when the experiment demands the highest possible cost. That next data point arrives the first time Dexter makes a conscious choice to protect the kill instead of the cover, turning Harry's most basic commandment into a negotiable variable. Throughout his life, the code has been sold as a survival algorithm. Kill only the guilty. Leave no trace. Never get caught. In this moment, Dexter decides that catching his quarry matters more than any of those protections, including the people who might be destroyed if he fails. Let's kick things off with one of the clearest examples of that shift: Dexter's pursuit of Travis Marshall, the Doomsday Killer. Travis is already on Miami Metro's radar, the city is in a panic, and Dexter has what the code would call a perfect out. He can hand over what he knows, let the system close in, and preserve his carefully constructed life as a blood spatter analyst, father, and seemingly harmless co-worker. Instead, he clings to the hunt. Dexter withholds evidence, manipulates crime scenes, and engineers alone time with Travis, even as the risks multiply. Witnesses are everywhere, the media is circling, and the religious imagery of the murders guarantees obsessive public scrutiny. He is fully aware that any misstep will generate forensic evidence he cannot completely control and timelines that do not add up. He registers those dangers in his internal narration. Then, he ignores them. His stated justification is simple and, on the surface, compelling. Travis is too dangerous to leave to chance. Harry's code taught him that the justice system fails, that monsters walk free on technicalities, that only a controlled kill guarantees safety. So Dexter tells himself that this is an emergency exception, a necessary deviation to stop an escalating threat. In reality, the pattern is already familiar. This is the same logic that once let him keep Brian close, that drew him to Leela, that pulled Miguel Prado under his influence. The dark passenger frames desire as duty. We're going to dive deep into why this is more than a tactical mistake. Structurally, don't get caught is the load-bearing wall of the code. It is the rule that protects every other rule from collapse. Once Dexter proves to himself that he can bend that wall for a particularly satisfying target, this would be the start of a new internal hierarchy. The urge to kill sits at the top, and the code becomes a language he uses to defend whatever the urge already wants. The long-term effects of that decision are devastating. By the time Dexter lures Travis to the abandoned church, he has accepted that his own exposure is an acceptable cost. The kill room is no longer a hidden lab. It is a stage built in the middle of an active investigation. When Debra walks in and discovers the truth with her own eyes, the terrifying consequence is clear. The moment he chose the kill over the cover didn't just endanger Dexter. It weaponized his secret against the person he claimed to love most, setting up an even darker choice that will push him beyond anything Harry ever imagined. That choice in the church is not an isolated lapse. It is the logical outcome of a long, quiet transformation at home. Throughout his life, Dexter tells himself that family is his anchor, the one part of his life that keeps the dark passenger in check. But by the middle seasons, the images that sell that story become more important to him than the people inside them. Let's kick things off with the barbecues. In the early suburban episodes, Dexter leans hard into the role of bland neighbor, apron on, tongs in hand, kids running through sprinklers. The camera lingers on family photos on the fridge, school events where he holds Rita's hand, birthday parties where he films the candles. Each scene works as camouflage. The more domestic noise around him, the easier it is for coworkers, neighbors, and even Deborah to dismiss any suspicion that he could kill. The backyard isn't a sanctuary. It is a stage-managed alibi. This would be the start of a chilling pattern. When a new target appears, family obligations become obstacles to be navigated, not priorities to be honored. Dexter skips out on dinners, lies about late nights at the lab, and reframes every broken promise as a necessary sacrifice. He tells himself that hunting the latest predator is how he protects Rita and the kids, that eliminating one more threat justifies missing a school play. In reality, the code becomes a moral smokescreen that lets him indulge his urges while pretending it is all for them. The most disturbing part is how quickly he accepts collateral risk. Take the close calls with Trinity. Dexter inserts himself into Arthur Mitchell's life under the guise of research and justice, even as Arthur tracks families, stalks homes, and escalates his own cycle of murder. There are moments when Dexter's double life nearly brushes directly against his own front door. Suspicious absences, unexplained mood swings, a killer whose pattern is literally centered on destroying households. Each time, Dexter registers the danger, then immediately reframes it. If he can just stay close to Arthur long enough to land him on a table, the temporary risk to his own family becomes, in his mind, acceptable. Here, The long-term effects of Harry's code are fully exposed. The rule was never protect your loved ones at all costs. It was never get caught. Once Rita and the kids primarily function as proof that he is normal, their safety becomes one variable among many in the equation of not being discovered. The family photo on the mantle is no longer a reminder of why he should stop. It is a shield he hides behind while moving closer to his next victims. And once loved ones are shields, not priorities, a darker possibility opens up. If their presence makes him safer, what happens when their proximity to danger becomes just another risk he can manage away? The series will answer that question in a way that permanently shatters the illusion that Dexter's code ever truly put them first. That question becomes much harder to ignore when Dexter kills someone, not because they are dangerous, but because they made him feel small. Let's kick things off with Season 7's most revealing kill, Louis Green. Louis is not a cartel boss, not a sadist, not even an active murderer. He is a petty cyber criminal and failed game designer who dares to mock Dexter's expertise, undermine him at work, and, most unforgivably, play with the Bay Harbor Butcher case as if it were intellectual property. His crime in Dexter's mind is less what he does to strangers and more what he represents. A smug outsider poking at the myth of the perfect blood analyst. Throughout his life, Dexter has framed the code as a firewall between his urges and everyone else's safety. Yet, when Louis tampers with his blood work, sends that grotesque ice truck killer hand, and keeps pushing after repeated warnings, the internal narration shifts. We're going to dive deep into those voiceovers because they expose the real hierarchy of concern. Dexter spends far more time replaying Louis' insults, his condescension, his attempt to ruin Dexter's life, than thinking about any actual victims of Louis' scams. The outrage is personal. The threat is to Dexter's self-image, not to public safety. On the boat, that imbalance becomes undeniable. Louis is tied up, gagged, panicking. But this is not a classic kill room with plastic, photos, and a forensic breakdown of past crimes. There is no ritualistic confrontation with evidence, no careful recitation of names. Instead, Dexter toys with him verbally, savoring the power reversal. The kill is quick, almost casual, but the cruelty lies in the indifference. Louis is not worthy of the code. He is an inconvenience to be erased. The plastic-wrapped precision of earlier seasons is replaced by something colder. A man using murder as conflict resolution. This would be the start of a new pattern, an event that changed how the audience can honestly describe Dexter's moral compass. Louis's body goes overboard without ceremony, without the usual internal justification that the world is safer now. The narration focuses on relief, on satisfaction, on the restoration of Dexter's control over his own narrative. In that moment, the dark passenger is not being managed by Harry's rules. It is being indulged by a wounded ego. The long-term effects of this are subtle but devastating. If Dexter can kill a coworker out of spite and feel almost nothing, then the distance between that act and harming someone truly close to him is no longer unthinkable. The psychological line has already been crossed. The code has been proven flexible, especially when pride is at stake. And once pride enters the equation, the next escalation becomes chillingly plausible. What happens when the person challenging Dexter's self-image is not a minor nuisance like Louis, but someone he actually loves? When the person challenging Dexter's self-image is someone he loves, the question stops being theoretical. It becomes a countdown to impact. Deborah is that impact, and her discovery is an event that changed the entire emotional logic of the series. Throughout his life, Dexter has relied on Deborah, seeing only what he presents, the awkward, reliable brother who shows up with takeout and advice. That image does not shatter all at once. It fractures slowly. Suspicion starts with the little gaps. Dexter, always at a crime scene before anyone else. His uncanny insight into killers. The way evidence just happens to line up in his favor. Deborah's denial is almost protective, a refusal to imagine that the one stable person in her life might be the very predator she hunts. The cracks widen after Travis Marshall. Deborah walks in on Dexter, killing Travis on the church altar, and in that instant, the dark passenger is no longer a metaphor. She sees the knife, the plastic, the ritual. Dexter's calm, almost rehearsed confession that he had to kill him lands as a logistical explanation, not a moral one. For Dexter, this is a system. For Deborah, it is a nightmare she cannot wake up from. In the days that follow, Deborah clings to the idea that this was a one-time break, a moment of insanity. Dexter lets her believe it, because admitting the truth would mean admitting that Harry's code has governed his entire life. But the small inconsistencies keep piling up. The blood slide box Dokes once discovered has its echo in Deborah's mind as she replays old cases. The Bay Harbor butcher profile. Dexter's late nights. Disappearing suspects. Every memory is retrofitted with horror. The real confrontation comes when Deborah catches Dexter in an active kill scenario, surrounded by plastic and a bound victim who is very much alive. The visual language of the kill room that has always been framed through Dexter's narration is suddenly seen through Deborah's eyes. The table is not justice, it is torture. The trophies are not forensic brilliance, they are proof of a long-running compulsion. Dexter speaks with chilling composure, laying out Harry's code as if reading from a manual. He tells Deborah he only kills those who deserve it, that the system fails, that this is necessary. His voice is steady, almost soothing. Deborah, by contrast, is shaking, gasping, backing away as if from a wild animal. Her body betrays what her mind is still trying to process. Her brother is a serial killer, and this room is who he really is. This contrast is crucial. For Dexter, the kill ritual is normalized, practiced, even comforting. For Deborah, it is the annihilation of every assumption about her family, her job, and her own instincts as a cop. Was every promotion, every solved case, built on a lie? From this point, every choice Dexter makes carries new weight. Someone who loves him has finally seen the monster. The long-term effects of that gaze are terrifying. Does he stop killing? Does he trust her with the truth? Or, in the most chilling possibility, does he protect his secret the same way he always has, by prioritizing his urges over any human connection, even if that means Deborah becomes the next casualty of his life? The answer to that question will define the most terrifying thing Dexter ever does, and how far he is willing to go to keep her from walking away or turning him in. And that brings us to the most dangerous evolution in Dexter's entire life, the moment Harry's code quietly dies and is replaced by something far more unstable, far more personal, and ultimately far more terrifying. After Deborah discovers the truth in the church, Dexter's calculations shift. Harry used to be the imaginary judge in his head, the voice asking whether a potential kill fit the rules. Now, the real judge is Deborah, sitting across from him, shaking, traumatized, and begging him to stop. Throughout his life, Dexter measured his urges against Harry's lectures. After the church, He measures them against how much more damage Deb can take. Let's kick things off with the promise that defines this new era. In her apartment, Deborah forces Dexter to say the words, "He will stop killing." On the surface, it looks like a moral breakthrough, a serial killer confronted, finally agreeing that what he does is wrong. But when we're going to dive deep into that scene, the subtext is chilling. Dexter does not suddenly believe his victims deserve to live. He believes Deborah cannot survive, knowing her brother is still out there hunting. The wrongness he responds to is her pain, not the act itself. From that point on, every conversation with Deb becomes a negotiation, not with conscience, but with capacity. When she finds out about him killing LaGuerta, Dexter does not argue that the kill violated Harry's code. He argues that it was necessary to protect them, necessary to protect Deborah. The logic is brutally simple. If the kill keeps Deb from breaking, then the kill is justified. Her emotional threshold replaces any fixed rule. This would be the start of an arrangement that can never hold. Deborah is not a static guideline carved into Dexter's mind like Harry's code. She is a human being in free fall. One day she is screaming that he is a monster, and she wishes she had never discovered the truth. Another day, she is covering for him, burning evidence, insisting they can somehow manage his dark passenger together. Those swings create openings, and Dexter slips through every one. He starts exploiting gray areas. If Deborah says no more killing, he tells himself that killing a truly dangerous target is actually protecting her. If she demands honesty, he gives partial truth, edited to match what she can handle. Harry's rules were already a compromise, but they were at least consistent. Deborah's boundaries move with her trauma, and Dexter learns to surf those waves. The long-term effects of this are catastrophic. As his addiction collides with her need for safety and redemption, there is no stable code left, only a desperate man improvising in real time. When that desperation finally peaks, the most terrifying thing Dexter ever does will not be guided by Harry, or by justice, or even by Deborah's pleas. It will be guided by the single, warped belief this new code has taught him, that he is allowed to kill for her. The question is, when her survival and his urges cannot both win, which one does he protect? When that belief finally meets Deborah's breaking point, Dexter does something even more chilling than a kill. He turns the person who loves him most into a lever, not by accident, by choice. Let's kick things off with the moment that makes this explicit. After Deborah walks into the church and sees Dexter plunge the knife into Travis Marshall, her entire life detonates. She is a cop, raised by Harry, sworn to stop killers, and now the brother she adores has been discovered as one of them. In the days that follow, Deborah spirals between arresting Dexter, turning him in, or somehow saving him from his own dark passenger. Dexter recognizes that conflict immediately. Throughout his life, he has read people the way other detectives read blood spatter. Here, he starts reading Deborah's love as an asset. He sees the way her voice shakes when she says, "I should arrest you." He hears the way she follows it with, "I can't lose you," and understands the hierarchy of her values. That is the line he chooses to push. So he begins to weaponize their shared past. He reminds her that Harry took them both in, that they survived a brutal childhood together, that they only made it through because they had each other. He leans on phrases like, "I never wanted this for you," and "I'm still your brother," framing his killings as a tragic burden he carries alone. The subtext is clear. If Deborah exposes him, she is not just stopping a killer, she is abandoning family. The manipulation sharpens when LaGuerta starts closing in on the Bay Harbor butcher. Deborah is torn between helping LaGuerta find the truth and protecting Dexter from exposure. Dexter does not simply beg. He tells Deborah that LaGuerta will destroy both of them. that everything Harry built will be ruined, that her entire life as a cop will be revealed as a lie. He takes her fear, her loyalty, her need to fix him, and braids them into a single argument. Helping him is the only way to save herself. We're going to dive deep into how calculated this becomes. Dexter registers every flinch on her face, every hesitation before she agrees to move evidence, to misdirect colleagues, to bend the law. He sees the pain, the self-disgust, the way she almost pulls back. And then he proceeds anyway. Her agony becomes proof that the leverage is working. This would be the start of a moral freefall. Once Dexter accepts that Deborah's love can be twisted into a tool to preserve his addiction, the distance between nudging her to lie and placing her in direct physical danger shrinks to almost nothing. If her loyalty can protect his life, why can't it also protect his ability to kill? Harry's code was supposed to limit the collateral damage of Dexter's urges. Here, the long-term effects of that code curdle into something else, the idea that protecting Dexter justifies any compromise. The next time LaGuerta closes in, that logic will demand a blood sacrifice, and Dexter will ask Deborah to stand even closer to the edge. The question becomes, when that edge turns into a kill room, whose life does her love purchase? That question is answered in a parking garage, not a kill room. When Deborah pulls her gun on Dexter as he stands over LaGuerta, the edge finally becomes a choice between two lives, and the code that once promised order mutates into an ultimatum. Let's kick things off with the trap itself. LaGuerta has discovered too much. The Bay Harbor Butcher evidence, the gas receipts, the pattern that keeps circling back to Dexter. Deborah, trying to protect him within the system, fails. The investigation tightens. Dexter decides the only solution is to kill LaGuerta on New Year's Eve, staging it as a shootout with Estrada. Deborah walks into that warehouse expecting to stop a disaster, and instead discovers Dexter with a knife, LaGuerta on the floor, begging her to see the truth. Throughout his life, Dexter has insisted that no innocent victims would die for his dark passenger. In this moment, that promise collapses. Deborah is not there as a partner. She is there as leverage. The circumstances give her no real choice. Shoot Dexter, shoot LaGuerta, or hesitate and risk them both dying in chaos. The code that Harry built now corners Harry's daughter, forcing her to decide which body she can live with. Her immediate reaction is pure shock. Deborah's gun shakes, her breathing fractures, and the scene narrows to a tunnel between Dexter and LaGuerta. LaGuerta pleads, do the right thing. Dexter, in contrast, does not rant or rage. He is calm, almost gentle, telling Deborah that LaGuerta will destroy their lives, that this is the only way out. He does not say kill her as much as he builds a moral cage around Deborah until that trigger pull feels inevitable. When she fires, the sound is an event that changed both of them. Deborah collapses over LaGuerta's body, sobbing, gagging, barely able to process that her hand delivered the kill. Dexter moves in to soothe, to hold her, to whisper that they had no choice, as if language can sand down the horror. He minimizes what just happened, framing it as a tragic necessity rather than the shattering of his last boundary. The long-term effects of that night are brutal. Deborah spirals into panic attacks, insomnia, and self-destruction. She quits the force, abuses drugs and alcohol, and throws herself into dangerous situations because her own life no longer feels worth protecting. Her work, once her anchor, disintegrates, relationships become impossible. Every interaction is haunted by the knowledge that she executed an innocent woman to keep Dexter's secret. This is moral injury, not simple guilt. Deborah did not just witness a kill, she became the weapon. The truth that she discovered about Dexter now lives inside her as self-hatred. Protecting him has broken her soul in a way no external trauma ever did. And that is where the central thesis sharpens. By letting his urges dictate that night, Dexter proves that preserving his double life matters more than Deborah's mind, career, or future. Harry's code was meant to contain a killer. Here, it consumes Harry's own daughter. Once Dexter accepts that her love can be used as a tool, the most terrifying act is only one step further. The moment he is willing to sacrifice not just her conscience, but her entire existence, to keep killing. The next time he tells himself he is saving Deborah, the rescue will be indistinguishable from ruin. That line about rescue becoming ruin is not poetic exaggeration. It is a summary of the trap Dexter has built for himself. By the time the most terrifying act arrives, the world around him is a maze with no exits, designed by his own compromises. Let's kick things off with the converging pressure. Law enforcement is not just vaguely suspicious anymore. They are circling. From Dokes before, to Quinn and Lagerta later, to federal eyes after the Bay Harbor butcher case, each investigation learns a little more about the pattern. Blood slides. Missing suspects. Dexter always near the center. Throughout his life, the code promised invisibility, but every close call leaves a residue of doubt in his colleagues that never fully goes away. At the same time, Deborah's mind is fracturing under the weight of the truth she has discovered. She is asked to live with a reality where her brother is both the man who saved her and the man who kills. Panic attacks, rage, self-loathing, and professional compromise pile up when Dexter drags her across one ethical line after another. The long-term effects of that trauma turn Deborah from a moral compass into collateral damage. Layered over this is the erosion of Harry's code itself. Early on, the rules feel rigid. Only kill confirmed monsters, never endanger innocents, never get caught. But each time Dexter bends a clause, an escape route disappears. He lets Trinity live long enough to study him, and Rita dies. He protects Lumen and lies more deeply, endangering Astor and Cody's stability. He kills Miguel after teaching him to kill, seeding a wave of violence he then has to clean up. The code is no longer a boundary. It becomes a vocabulary Dexter uses to justify whatever his dark passenger already wants. By the later seasons, there are kills that are not about justice at all, just about relief. Targets who are only partially vetted. People who threaten his comfort more than they threaten the public. Each one quietly narrows the future. Any path where Dexter walks away, where Deborah heals, where his coworkers stay safe, requires a level of self-denial he has already proven unwilling to choose. So, when the final crisis comes, Dexter's mindset is brutally clear. He runs the math and sees that there is no configuration where everyone survives unscarred. Someone will be sacrificed, Deborah's career, Harrison's safety, an innocent suspect, or Dexter himself. The question is not whether there will be victims, but which victims he can live with. This would be the start of the most chilling realization. The logical choice, in Dexter's mind, is the one that protects his ability to kill. The catastrophic decision that follows is not a sudden snap. It is the endpoint of a long sequence of avoidable choices, each one trading another person's future for a few more nights on the table. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into that single decision, the moment where Dexter finally proves that the code was never stronger than his urges. That single decision arrives in one of the most claustrophobic moments of Dexter's life. It is not on a boat or in a kill room. It is in a ruined church, with Travis Marshall's blood still drying, and Deborah Morgan staring at Dexter in absolute shock. Deb has just discovered the truth in the worst way possible. Her brother, the man she trusted more than anyone, is standing over a fresh body with a bloody knife in his hand. Throughout his life, Dexter believed Harry's code would keep moments like this from ever happening. The rule was simple: never get caught, never let innocent people see the dark passenger. But in that instant, with Deborah backing away from him, that promise is already broken. The concrete situation that follows is even more brutal. Deborah's a cop, the new lieutenant, and she immediately starts talking about turning him in, about evidence, about making it right. That is where the real dilemma begins. For the first time, Dexter cannot both follow the code and protect Deborah. If he obeys Harry's teachings to the letter, he should accept the consequences, let the system do what it will, and end the cycle of lies and collateral victims. If he protects Deborah, he has to destroy evidence, manipulate an active investigation, and potentially kill anyone who gets too close to the truth. Let's kick things off with how Dexter frames those options in his head. Harry's voice tells him that the code was designed to limit damage, to make sure his urges only touch the guilty. Deborah, shaking and horrified, represents everything that is still human in his life, so each path becomes a different kind of loss. Turn himself in, and he loses Deborah as a sister, as a believer, as the last person who saw him as more than a monster. Protect her at any cost, and he risks turning her into exactly what Harry tried to prevent: collateral damage in service of the dark passenger. We're going to dive deep into a subtle but crucial shift here. Earlier in the series, Dexter would have asked, what is the right application of the code? Now his inner narration turns darker. What can I live with? That change is everything. It means external morality, even Harry's flawed guidelines, no longer matter. The only measure is his own tolerance for guilt. This would be the start of an event that changed the entire meaning of the code. By choosing based on what he can endure, Dexter quietly elevates his urges above any principle. The long-term effects of that shift will be devastating, because the path he takes in that church will lead directly to the most terrifying act of his life. As Deborah waits for his answer, and the sirens draw closer in the distance, Dexter makes his choice in silence. The narration stops short of saying it out loud, holding us on the edge, because the next moment is where the code finally dies. XXX, XX. In that silence, as the sirens close in and Deborah waits for an answer, Dexter is already rewriting what is about to happen. The code may be dying, but the justification engine in his head is just getting started. Throughout his life, Dexter has survived by claiming his kills are merciful. Not merciful to the victims, necessarily, but merciful to a world that, in his view, cannot protect itself. Harry's code gave language to that fantasy. Kill only those who kill. Put them down cleanly. Spare everyone else the pain, the trials, the failures of the legal system Harry no longer trusted. That framing allows Dexter to look at a plastic-wrapped corpse and see a public service, not a human being. Let's kick things off with the basic idea that makes his most terrifying act possible. Dexter believes there are fates worse than death, and he believes he is uniquely qualified to decide who needs to be spared from them. Sometimes that means sparing the public from a predator. Sometimes it means sparing himself from exposure or prison. And in the moment we are building toward, it means convincing himself that ending one life is an act of protection, not aggression. This would be the start of a shift, where he applies the same warped mercy to people he claims to love. The same mental script he once reserved for serial rapists and child killers begins to creep into his thinking about family, partners, and anyone who has discovered the truth. If a victim on his table can be put out of their misery, than a loved one drowning in trauma, guilt, or knowledge of his dark passenger can be framed the same way. The category of who might need to be spared expands, and that is where the horror really begins. To make that leap, Dexter leans on a specific set of criteria. First, inevitability of suffering. He tells himself that what lies ahead for this person is only pain, psychological collapse, legal ruin, or a life defined entirely by his crimes. Second, impossibility of escape. In his internal narration, there is no realistic path where they walk away whole. The system will fail them, therapy will fail them, even distance from him will not erase what has been discovered. Third, his unique ability to end it quickly. No one else, in his mind, can deliver a clean, controlled, almost clinical exit the way he can with a kill. Each piece sounds almost compassionate on the surface, but together they create a closed loop where killing becomes the only kind option. The long-term effects of Harry's original compromise echo here. A child taught that killing can be protective grows into an adult who can dress up the most selfish choice as a sacrifice. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into the single moment where that logic reaches its peak, and a man who thinks he is saving someone commits the most chilling act of his entire life. That peak arrives on a single crisis night, late in the series, when every compromise Dexter has ever made finally comes due. Throughout his life, the code has been presented as a structure, a way to live with the urges without drowning in them. On this night, it turns into a cage he is ready to smash. Let's kick things off with the situation on the ground. Dexter is tracking a major killer who threatens to disappear if he does not act immediately. Debra is circling closer than ever to the truth, and his double life is collapsing under the weight of work, fatherhood, and that relentless dark passenger. It is not one problem, it is every problem at once. The series condenses years of tension into a few hours where every rule Harry ever gave him is tested. The first pillar to crack is don't get caught. Dexter has always treated that commandment as sacred because Harry tied it directly to protecting the family. But now the safest move would be to walk away from the hunt, to let the killer live one more night. Instead, Dexter chooses proximity to exposure. He lies to Debra, manipulates his schedule, and races toward danger, fully aware that any misstep could expose him to his sister, his colleagues, and the entire justice system Harry once served. Next, only kill the guilty comes under pressure. The target is guilty, but Dexter's focus is no longer on justice. The kill becomes about control. Debra's suspicions, the threat of losing his son, the memory of Rita's death, all fuse into a single obsessive need to assert dominance over at least one variable in his life. The code says the victim's crimes justify the ritual. Dexter's internal monologue quietly flips that equation. The ritual justifies everything else. Protect the family and keep the life separate collapse together. By choosing the hunt over emotional honesty, Dexter knowingly drags Debra into the blast radius. He lies to her face, weaponizes her trust, and uses her movements as cover. The life is no longer separate. It is parasitic, feeding directly on the people Harry told him to shield. This is an event that changed the emotional meaning of every kill that came before. We're going to dive deep into Dexter's internal narration here, because the break is not just in what he does, but in how he talks to himself. He stops reciting Harry's rules as guiding principles and starts mocking them as limitations. The code becomes Harry's fear, Harry's guilt, Harry's way of keeping me small. Each remembered lesson is reframed as an obstacle between Dexter and the pure expression of his urges. The crucial shift is conscious. Dexter does not accidentally drift past the boundary. He steps over it. In voiceover, he effectively grants himself a one-night exemption, deciding that this situation is bigger than the code, that Harry's rules don't apply to what has to be done. For the first time, the dark passenger is not being channeled, it is being unleashed with full permission. The long-term effects of Harry's original compromise reach their endpoint here, as the student overrules the teacher and prepares to commit an act that is no longer about justice, or even survival, but about desire. By the time this night ends, Dexter will do something that proves the code was never his morality, only his leash. That leash finally snaps on a night when Dexter chooses a target who, in any earlier season, would never have made it past the first background check. This is not a cartel butcher or a trophy-keeping sadist. It is a man standing in the gray area Harry's code was supposed to fence off. Let's kick things off with who this person actually is. He is a vice detective, nominally on Dexter's side of the law, who has been skimming cash from narcotics busts and passing tips to criminals in exchange for quiet favors. On paper, that profile looks dangerous. Corrupt cops enable killers, bury cases, and make real victims disappear in procedural black holes. Throughout his life, Dexter has framed such corruption as a gateway to worse crimes, an early warning sign of predators hiding behind badges. But this time, the investigation is disturbingly thin. In earlier seasons, Dexter built airtight dossiers, following suspects for weeks, cross-checking crime scene evidence, and listening for the slip that revealed a true killer. Here, he latches onto rumor, a vague informant tip, a suspicious bank deposit. Every new detail is treated not as a clue to be tested, but as confirmation of what his dark passenger already wants. We're going to dive deep into how different his process looks. He ignores exculpatory details, cases the detective pushed through internal affairs, victims' families who praise his persistence, colleagues who mention late nights spent chasing leads that do not benefit him financially at all. Instead, Dexter zooms in on a single photo of the cop shaking hands with a known dealer, cropping out the charity event banner in the background. The narrative is being edited in real time to justify a kill. On the table, the ambiguity becomes unbearable. The detective wakes up to plastic and duct tape, seeing the kill room that so many truly guilty victims have seen. But his reaction is not the smug denial or predatory rage Dexter is used to. He panics, then pleads, then starts listing names of people he has actually helped. He talks about an ex-wife who still calls him when their daughter has nightmares. He begs Dexter to look at the framed school portrait he keeps in his wallet, edges worn from being opened and closed. This is where the human detail cuts through the ritual. Dexter notices the ink smudge on the man's fingers from filling out reports, the cheap tie with a stain from cafeteria spaghetti, the hesitation in his voice when he admits taking cash once and hating himself for it. Is he lying? Possibly. Is he a proven murderer under the code's usual standard? Absolutely not. Even by Harry's loose rules, this is not a clean case. There is no body, no bloodslide waiting to be made that will tie the detective to an undisputed kill. There is only Dexter's conviction and a mounting, almost physical need to satisfy his urges. This would be the start of a moral freefall, an event that changed how the code functions, from a set of breaks to a thin story told after the fact. As the knife hovers and the detective keeps talking, the question is no longer whether Dexter can get away with it, but whether there is any line he will not cross once his dark passenger is fully in control. In that suspended second, with the knife hovering and the detective still talking, the code has already failed. What follows is the proof. The most terrifying part is not just that Dexter is willing to kill this man, it is that, to make it happen, he quietly drags Deborah into the blast radius. Let's kick things off with the chain of choices that puts her there. It starts with a lie about his whereabouts, a casual cover story delivered with the same ease as any other night shift. He tells Deborah he is buried in blood work, when in reality he is stalking this detective, steering him toward a place Dexter has already chosen. The manipulated lead comes next. A planted tip, a staged connection. Dexter nudges the investigation just enough so that Deborah, doing her job, will inevitably follow the trail he has laid down. Throughout his life, Dexter has believed he can compartmentalize like this: work over here, kill over there, Deborah in a separate, protected box. But the ritual requires a scene, and the scene requires evidence. So he dresses the location, salts it with clues the detective cannot ignore, fully aware that Deborah is the one most likely to back him up. The code says, never get caught. The dark passenger adds an unspoken clause, and never let anything or anyone interrupt the kill. As Deborah moves through the city, her unease becomes its own kind of tracking shot. She notices how quickly this lead appeared, how conveniently it points toward Dexter's latest obsession, and how her brother has been just a little too eager to stay involved. Her instincts flare. The detective's behavior feels off. The pattern doesn't quite fit, yet she still trusts Dexter enough to keep going. This would be the start of a subtle internal split: the cop who senses danger, and the sister who believes her brother could never be the source of it. The episode cuts between them like a metronome. Dexter taping plastic, laying out tools, rehearsing the justification that will make this man one of his victims. Deborah closing in, gun drawn, heart racing, completely unaware that the geography of the kill room and the route of her approach are now intersecting. Every new step she takes is powered by faith in the code of law. Every knot Dexter tightens is powered by faith in Harry's code. When Dexter finally realizes Deborah is near, the horror is not that he panics. It is that he calculates. He tells himself he can manage both. Finish the ritual, control the scene, keep Deborah safe. In that moment, her safety becomes another variable in a murder plan, rather than the one line he would never cross. The long-term effects of this choice will echo through both of their lives. But for now, the question narrows to a single, chilling possibility: what happens if Deborah opens the wrong door before the knife comes down? The answer is coming, and it will redefine what collateral damage means in Dexter's world. That wrong door is not just a metaphor. It has a physical address, a real location, where Dexter's entire system finally looks as fragile as it actually is. The kill room that follows does not feel like the work of the Bay Harbor butcher. It feels like an accident waiting to be discovered. Let's kick things off with the visual shock of it. Instead of the usual clinical tableau, plastic is thrown up at odd angles, seams are exposed, and whole patches of wall and floor are left uncovered. Tape dangles, light bleeds through gaps, and every edge whispers evidence. The space looks improvised, almost panicked, as if the dark passenger grabbed the wheel and Dexter's planning brain never fully caught up. This is not a ritual so much as a reaction. Throughout his life, Dexter relied on the ritual of the kill room to convince himself that there was order in what he did. The plastic sheeting, the drain access, the meticulous wrapping of tools and trophies turned murder into a controlled procedure, a private surgery where only guilty victims were allowed on the table. Harry's code lived in those preparations. Every carefully chosen location, every exit route, every bleach bottle was a physical reminder that this kill had been researched, justified, and contained. Here, that illusion collapses. The room feels temporary, wedged into Dexter's schedule rather than dominating it. There is no sense of sacred preparation, only the echo of rushed decisions and a timeline driven by emotion. We're going to dive deep into what that means, because the environment betrays the truth long before Dexter does. Key elements are simply missing. The research is incomplete, the pattern of prior surveillance is thin, and Dexter walks in without the calm certainty that this target has been dissected on paper first. There is no prepared blood slide waiting in his pocket, no quiet moment where he lines up the microscope box in his mind. Even the disposal plan feels half-formed, with no perfect current to carry the bags away. No trusted routine to erase the kill. The long-term effects of this kind of impulsivity will be devastating, but in the moment, it only registers as a low, constant wrongness. Dexter senses it. The camera lingers on him, testing the plastic with his hands, glancing at exposed corners, recalculating. His posture is tighter, his movements clipped. The confidence that once came from honoring Harry's rules has been replaced by a jittery awareness that this room could betray him. The kill room becomes a mirror, reflecting how far the code is eroded. This would be the start of Dexter killing to satisfy an urge first and justifying it later. What makes this so terrifying is not just the danger to evidence, but the danger to anyone who stumbles in. A sloppy room is an open invitation for collateral damage, and the person closest to opening that door is Deborah, whose faith in Dexter and in the code is about to be tested in the harshest way possible. Because when that plastic rustles and the knife finally comes up, the question is no longer, is this victim guilty? It becomes, who is this room really built for? That question finally gets answered in a single, suffocating moment, when Dexter has to choose between finishing a kill and saving Deborah. The room is already prepped, plastic tight, knives laid out, the victim strapped down and shaking. This is Dexter at peak ritual, the dark passenger fully in control. But then the outside world intrudes. A phone buzzes. A police alert pings. Deborah is closer than expected, responding to the same trail that led Dexter here, walking straight toward a trap she does not understand. Throughout his life, Dexter believed the code would protect the people he cared about. Harry drilled it in, never get caught, never let the kill touch family. Yet now, the code collides with reality. On one side, a bound target who has seen Dexter's face, discovered his truth, and could expose his entire life if released. On the other, Deborah, charging in blind, unarmed against a predator and the brother she still trusts. This is where we're going to dive deep into his internal calculus. The narration slows, the camera lingers. Dexter starts running probabilities like a machine. If he leaves now, the victim might escape, call the police, describe the room, the knives, the plastic. Years of carefully hidden urges, every secret kill, suddenly on the verge of daylight. If he stays, Deborah walks into a live crime scene, or worse, becomes a hostage, another potential body tied to his addiction. For the first time, Dexter does not automatically move toward Deborah. He hesitates, then rationalizes. Deborah is capable. She is a decorated detective, trained, armed, backed by the entire department. The person on the table is too dangerous to leave alive, a monster who will kill again, a threat that almost justifies breaking every boundary. And above all, the risk of exposure feels too great. If this victim talks, the consequences do not stop at Dexter. Deborah's career, Harrison's future, every life orbiting his secret gets dragged into the fire. So he reframes the choice. Protecting the kill becomes protecting Deborah. Preserving his secret becomes preserving everyone else. It is a chilling bit of self-deception, delivered with the same calm tone he once used to recite Harry's rules. This would be the start of a new hierarchy in his mind, where the kill and the code sit above any single person, even the sister who has sacrificed everything for him. Then comes the irreversible move. Dexter turns away from the door, away from the thought of intercepting Deborah, and back to the table. The knife comes down. Plastic snaps. Blood hits the wrap before he even checks whether Deborah has made it out alive. In that instant, the series quietly answers its central question. No one is truly above his addiction. And the long-term effects of that single decision will not just reshape Deborah's faith in Dexter, they will redefine what she does the moment she finally walks into one of his rooms and sees who it was really built for. That first spray of blood over Deborah's body is the warning. What comes next is the revelation. For the first time, the series stops letting Dexter hide behind language and lets the camera show what Harry always feared he really was. As Dexter steps in for the fatal blow, the tension drains out of him in a way that feels almost wrong to watch. His shoulders, which had been tight and hunched, just loosen. His jaw unclenches. Even his eyes, usually narrowed in focus, go soft, almost peaceful. Throughout his life, we have seen him brace himself before a kill, perform the ritual of the code like a penance. Here, the body language tells a different truth. This is relief. Normally, this would be the moment where the dark passenger gets narrated into something noble. Dexter would talk about predators, about justice, about how his victims deserve what is coming. Instead, there is only breath, the sound of the knife going in, a low exhale that plays less like moral certainty and more like someone finally scratching a long, ignored itch. The absence of his usual justification monologue is louder than any speech. The code is not guiding him, the urge is. The victim feels that difference before the blade lands. They are not a Brian or a Trinity, a monster so clearly guilty that the audience can hide behind the same rationalizations Dexter uses. They plead, they argue, they insist there are explanations, that the evidence is messy, that even Harry's rules would not make this an easy case. In one line, they call out exactly what the scene is exposing. Dexter's making a choice, not passing a sentence. Their voice cracks. They ask if he is sure. Not sure they are guilty, but sure he wants to do this. That distinction is devastating, because the camera cuts back to Dexter's face, and the answer is already there. He looks almost serene. There is no flicker of doubt, no flash of the man who hesitated when Deborah was in danger. Only the calm of someone finally giving in to the kill. We are going to dive deep into that expression, because it quietly destroys the fantasy that Harry's code ever created a hero. This is not the traumatized child redirected into protecting the innocent. This is an adult who has discovered that the dark passenger feels better when it is fed, and in this moment, nothing else matters. Not evidence, not ambiguity, not the long-term effects on the people who still believe in him. When the blade goes in and Dexter's lips twitch upward, even slightly, the series shows the nightmare version of Harry's worst prediction. His son is not killing because he must. He is killing because he likes it. And from here on, every person who discovers the truth about him will be confronting that reality. Not the myth he spent a lifetime selling. That tiny smile is the moment the mask slips, and the series doesn't let it fade before delivering an event that changed how close Dexter comes to abandoning the code altogether, because this time, someone else is about to see him. Let's kick things off with the intrusion itself. The plastic is still taut, the air still thick with bleach and copper, when an innocent presence crosses the threshold. In one version of Dexter's life, this is Deborah stumbling into the church with Travis Marshall on the table. In another, it is a coworker or bystander pushing open a door that was supposed to stay locked. The details shift, but the horror is the same. A person who believes in Dexter, or at least believes in ordinary reality, steps straight into his private nightmare. Throughout his life, Dexter has managed to keep these worlds separate. Work in one box, family in another, the kill room as the sealed chamber where the dark passenger can breathe. But when that door opens, the separation collapses. The plastic curtains, the bound body, Dexter's gloved hands frozen mid-motion, all become undeniable evidence that this is not self-defense, not a heat-of-the-moment attack, but a ritual kill prepared in advance. The series lingers on sensory detail to make this contamination feel physical. The witness chokes on the sharp chemical smell, hears the faint drip of diluted blood hitting plastic, and sees Dexter's posture, relaxed, almost practiced, standing over a helpless victim. There is no struggle, no immediate threat to Dexter's life, only the cold geometry of a planned execution. That is when the truth is discovered in an instant. Whatever story Dexter has told about justice, this scene exposes the urges underneath. Then the camera turns to him. We're going to dive deep into that split second, because it is the most terrifying part. Dexter's face doesn't show panic first. It shows calculation. Predatory assessment. The same gaze he uses to decide whether a target fits Harry's code now sweeps over someone who has never killed anyone, whose only crime is walking in at the wrong moment. In that heartbeat, multiple paths flash across his mind. He could lie, spin this as a desperate attempt to stop a monster. He could reach for emotional manipulation, leaning on love, on shared history, on the belief that he is still the man they thought they knew. Or he could do the simplest, cleanest thing from a predator's perspective, eliminate the witness. This would be the start of a new, darker rule, not killing because they are guilty, but because they saw him. The long-term effects of that choice would be irreversible, turning everyone in his life into a potential victim the second they get too close. And the chilling part is that, for a moment, Dexter genuinely considers it. The knife is already in his hand. The plastic is already down. All it would take is one step forward. The only question is whether the dark passenger takes it. The dark passenger does not take that step. Dexter does. He freezes, recalculates, and in a split second, the entire scene shifts from imminent execution to risk management. Throughout his life, Dexter has framed his kills as inevitable, as if the urges and the code are driving, and he is just along for the ride. But in this moment, with an innocent witness staring at him in terror, we're going to dive deep into something even colder. His decision not to kill is just as engineered as every murder. Let's kick things off with the way his brain slices through the problem. First, the risk profile. How much does this witness actually know? Do they understand what they saw, or are they clinging to denial? Dexter gauges their emotional state, their history, their ties to law enforcement, and starts calculating probability, not morality. Second, leverage. This person is scared, alone, and now bound to him by a secret that could destroy his life. That makes them useful. Killing them would erase a liability, but it would also erase a potential asset. Then comes the logistical layer. Another body means another cleanup, another missing person report, another pattern for someone like Dokes or Deborah to notice. The code says never get caught, and here, the cleanest way to honor Harry's rule is not to kill. He doesn't stop because it is wrong. He stops because it is inefficient, too messy, too likely to expose him. The knife lowers not out of mercy, but out of strategy. What follows is the most chilling pivot. In the space where an apology or confession should live, Dexter moves into control mode. His voice softens. His posture relaxes. He comforts, but every word is a tool. He reframes what they saw as a one-time lapse, a necessary evil, a dark secret that proves they are special, because they discovered the real him. Gaslighting blends with grooming. He makes the horror about trust, about connection, about shared responsibility. This would be the start of a new kind of manipulation, where survival is granted in exchange for silence and emotional dependence. The witness is not just spared, they are recruited into a distorted orbit around his dark passenger. The long-term effects of that choice are devastating, because it proves something fans often want to deny: Dexter can control himself. He is fully capable of restraint. He just chooses to use it selectively, when the consequences demand it. That selective mercy is arguably more terrifying than another body on the table. A compulsive killer driven entirely by urges is tragic and monstrous, but still limited. Dexter is worse. He can pause, evaluate, and decide that keeping an innocent alive will serve his life better than ending them. The victim walks away breathing, yet permanently altered, carrying the truth like a ticking bomb. And as we move forward, that bomb will not only endanger them, it will reshape how everyone around Dexter understands what he is willing to do to protect his secret. That ticking bomb finally explodes in front of Deborah. Not in a courtroom, not through a confession, but in the worst possible way. She walks in on Dexter mid-kill, knife raised, plastic everywhere, and Travis Marshall begging for his life on the altar of a church. At first, her reaction is physical. She freezes. Her gun drops slightly. Her brain is still trying to label this as a hostage situation, as something she can fix as a cop and a sister. But the room refuses to cooperate with that fantasy. The plastic wrap, the taped-down victim, the calm way Dexter stands over Travis with a knife he clearly knows how to use. This is not an emergency improvisation. This is ritual. Throughout his life, Dexter has worked tirelessly to make sure no one ever sees him like this. Deborah is the last person he wanted in that doorway, because she represents his best lie, the image of a good brother, a reliable partner at Miami Metro, a man who saves, not kills. In a single glance, Deborah discovered that this is not an isolated lapse. This is a system, a code, a life. The horror on her face is not just about Travis. It is about retroactively rereading every moment she has ever shared with Dexter. Let's kick things off with the betrayal layered under that shock. Deborah defended Dexter at work, promoted him, trusted his instincts on cases. She invited him into every vulnerable part of her life, while he hid the darkest passenger imaginable. The realization lands bluntly. The person she trusted most has been lying for years, and the lies were covering bodies. Her mind starts doing what detectives are trained to do. It connects patterns. All those nights, Dexter working late. The perfect timing on Bay Harbor Butcher breakthroughs. The way he always seemed one step ahead of killers that baffled everyone else. This would be the start of a new, unbearable narrative. Dexter as the common denominator in a trail of death she never saw because she loved him. We're going to dive deep into the cognitive dissonance here. Deborah remembers Dexter holding her when she broke down, cooking her breakfast, saving her from Brian, from Lila, from Jordan Chase. Those memories crash violently against the clinical brutality in front of her now, where he is seconds away from plunging a knife into a helpless man. How can the same hands that comforted her be the hands that kill with such practiced precision? An event that changed her entire understanding of justice happens in silence. Dexter tries to explain, to reframe this as necessary, as moral, as an extension of Harry's code. But Deborah's body language answers before her words ever can. Her jaw clenches. Her eyes don't move to Travis. They stay locked on Dexter, wide, wet, and utterly shell-shocked. In that stare, the relationship crosses a line it can never come back from. She is no longer just Dexter's sister or his colleague. She has become a witness, a victim of the truth, and the consequences of that gaze will drive everything that comes next. That gaze doesn't end in the church. It follows them into the car, into the drive home, into every second of silence where language fails and breathing is suddenly too loud. The drive is almost wordless. Debra's hands are locked at 10 and 2, her knuckles white, eyes fixed on the road like a rookie at her first crime scene. Dexter sits beside her, close enough to touch, but emotionally exiled to the passenger seat of his own life. Every time a sentence begins, Deb, this, or Dexter, how could, it dies halfway, strangled by the fear of naming what has just been discovered. This is an event that changed the entire grammar of their relationship. Before, arguments were about late reports, dangerous cases, or Dexter being distant. Now, beneath every half-finished thought, there is a corpse on a church floor and a sister who watched her brother kill in cold, ritualized blood. The truth is too big for small talk, so they default to silence, which somehow feels louder than any screaming match. Throughout his life, Dexter has been protected by Debra's loyalty. She defended him at work, covered for his absences, believed in the good man Harry claimed he could be. But this would be the start of a brutal redefinition. Debra is no longer just the protective sister. She becomes a reluctant accomplice and, at the same time, a jailer. She knows the monster is real now, and that she helped shield it for years without understanding what she was defending. That dual role is what makes this night uniquely terrifying. Debra feels responsible for containing the dark passenger Harry never warned her about. Every key she has to Dexter's apartment, every access she has to case files, suddenly feels like a lock or a chain. She patrols his life the way she would monitor a high-risk suspect, checking alibis, questioning late nights, trying to make sure there are no more victims created on her watch. Dexter senses this immediately, and his response is calculated. Instead of pulling away, he leans into emotional dependency, reminding her of childhood memories, of times he saved her, of the life they built together under Harry's roof. He weaponizes their shared history, using it as a living argument against turning him in. If Harry's code once told him how to kill, now his new, unspoken code tells him how to keep Debra close enough to be useful, but too guilty to expose him. From this night on, every interaction is reframed. Every argument about a case is really about the church. Every plea, trust me, believe me, I've got this, echoes against the image of Travis Marshall on a table. Whenever Debra doubts herself, or Dexter, the conversation circles back here, explicitly or not. The long-term effects of this are devastating. Their bond becomes a closed loop of fear, love, and revulsion, with no exit that does not involve handcuffs or a morgue drawer. And as we're going to dive deep into later, this new code between them doesn't stay private. It starts bleeding into every other relationship Dexter has, raising the stakes for anyone who gets too close. That closed loop between Dexter and Debra doesn't just poison their private moments, it starts leaking into the halls of Miami Metro, warping cases, colleagues, and people who never even hear the word kill room. Let's kick things off with Debra at work. Throughout his life, Dexter relied on Deb to be the blunt, moral center of the show, the cop who still believed in the badge. After that night, we start to see microfractures. She snaps at coworkers over minor mistakes. She blows up at Batista in briefings. She pushes detectives to close files faster, not because the evidence is airtight, but because lingering on the details drags her back to what she discovered about Dexter's truth. The long-term effects of this are subtle but deadly. Rushed warrants, half-checked leads, and a lieutenant whose judgment is compromised by secrets she cannot share. Those emotional fissures line up perfectly with Dexter's own cover-up operations. Every time he alters a crime scene, loses a sample, or nudges Masuka away from a blood pattern that points too close to home, an entire investigative tree gets pruned. That body in the ocean that should have sparked a task force becomes a one-off. The Bay Harbor Butcher files stay closed because reopening them would mean reopening Dexter's life. Reports are massaged, timelines adjusted, and in some cases, offenders are quietly reclassified as accidental deaths or unknown assailants so that Harry's code can stay intact on paper. This would be the start of a different kind of body count, not the plastic-wrapped victims on Dexter's table, but the unseen victims who never even get a name on a whiteboard. Families wait for updates that never come, because the case that should have connected to a pattern was buried under Dexter's need to hide his dark passenger. Innocent suspects get dragged into interrogation rooms, pressed harder than they should be, because the real lead was discarded when Dexter removed a key piece of evidence. The justice system that Harry already distrusted becomes even more distorted, not by bureaucracy, but by one man's secret war. We're going to dive deep into kill scenes later, but here, the horror is bureaucratic and quiet. A mother who never finds out who killed her son. A teenager who carries a felony record for a crime he did not commit because Dexter redirected suspicion. Detectives burning overtime on dead ends, while the real predator walks free, protected by falsified lab results that Dexter signs off with a calm face. In that sense, the most terrifying aspect of his vigilantism is not the spectacle of a single night gone wrong. It is the way that one catastrophic choice radiates outward, bending the entire ecosystem around him. Colleagues lose faith without knowing why. Deborah's temper and erratic calls start to look like incompetence instead of trauma. And as the series moves forward, this invisible blast radius sets the stage for even darker consequences when someone finally traces all those quiet distortions back to Dexter himself. That invisible blast radius does something even more dangerous than wrecking other people's reputations. It feeds Dexter's ego. The night should have been an event that changed his entire relationship to the code. Instead, it becomes the night he realizes he can walk through fire and come out cleaner than everyone around him. In the immediate aftermath, Dexter's internal monologue does not linger on the innocent lives shaken or the collateral damage created. It lingers on performance, how quickly he improvised, how neatly he redirected suspicion, how completely he kept the truth buried. Throughout his life, Harry drilled the idea that one mistake could expose everything and destroy Dexter's life. Yet here, after a catastrophic breach, there is no arrest, no exposure, no direct consequence. The takeaway is not remorse, it is validation. Let's kick things off with how he rewrites the narrative for himself. Instead of seeing a loss of control, Dexter frames the chaos as proof of his necessity. Only someone like him, with a dark passenger honed by years of practice, could have handled that pressure. The near disaster becomes a case study in his own exceptionalism. In his mind, the code did not save him. His instincts did. That subtle distinction is terrifying because it moves the source of safety from Harry's rules to Dexter's ego. From there, this would be the start of a new pattern. We see more improvisation, less meticulous planning. He agrees to riskier kills, moves faster, cuts corners he once treated as sacred. The plastic sheeting is thrown up in less secure locations. The background checks on victims are thinner, justified with lines about knowing they are guilty. What used to be painstaking ritual, built to honor Harry's warnings, turns into a flexible guideline that can be bent whenever Dexter feels confident enough. Throughout his life, Dexter told himself that Harry's code was a chain holding the monster back. After this night, the chain feels optional. he starts believing the myth that he is a precision instrument of justice, uniquely equipped to do what the legal system never could. The fact that he survived breaking his own rules becomes Exhibit A in that argument. If reality did not punish him, why should he? This self-mythologizing is the real horror. A one-time breach, forgiven in the moment as a crisis response, quietly becomes the new baseline. Behavior that once horrified even him now reads as proof of evolution. The long-term effects of that shift are devastating. Every future rationalization traces back to this private conclusion that he can bend any rule and still land on his feet. And in the next phase of the story, when someone finally challenges that belief, the consequences will be far worse than a single bloody night. That private conclusion collides with something much harder on this night, an event that changed not just Dexter's trajectory, but how the audience is supposed to see him. Throughout his life, the series has trained viewers to stay inside his head. The wry narration, the deadpan jokes about the dark passenger, the careful framing of his victims as monsters who slip through the cracks of the system, all of it works together to make a serial killer feel like a problem-solving protagonist. Let's kick things off with that conditioning. From the pilot onward, Dexter's voiceover turns murder into a guided tour. Harry's code is presented as a twisted but structured response to uncontrollable urges, a set of rules that supposedly separates him from the predators he hunts. We hear his doubts, see his affection for Deborah and Harrison, and watch him agonize over each choice. The long-term effects of that perspective are powerful. It becomes easy to believe that, as long as the victims are worse. The balance sheet stays in the black, but on this night, every layer of justification peels away. The target is not a cartoonishly evil stranger. Innocent people are in direct, obvious danger because Dexter prioritizes the thrill and ritual of the kill over any other responsibility. The code does not guide him. It becomes an afterthought he retrofits to excuse what already happened. What plays out is raw brutality, driven less by justice than by compulsion and anger, and the camera refuses to flinch. This is where the show's usual tricks stop working. The narration cannot fully soften what has been discovered about him in this moment, that given a hard enough conflict between his urges and another person's life, the urges win. The plastic, the blade, the calculated calm all look exactly the same as every other kill, but the moral frame is gone. We are no longer watching the Bay Harbor butcher take out a monster. We are watching Dexter Morgan expose the lie at the center of Harry's code. So, the uncomfortable question lands. After seeing this, is there still a desire for him to escape consequences? If the answer is yes, what does that reveal about the appetite for antiheroes who entertain, as long as the narrative keeps calling their victims bad? The episode quietly turns the audience into a mirror. The horror is not only what he does, but how quickly decades of empathy and clever editing invite a search for one more loophole to keep rooting for him. In that sense, this night functions as a moral stress test. It pushes the series into darker, more honest territory by refusing to protect either the characters or the viewers from the truth of Dexter's nature. This would be the start of a new phase, where every future rationalization has to compete with the memory of this choice. And in the next section, we're going to dive deep into how the people closest to him respond when that truth finally breaks through the fantasy he has sold them for so long. That memory does not stay in the kill room. It follows Dexter home, to work, into the quiet spaces Harry once filled with rules and reassurances, and it starts talking louder than the code ever did. Throughout his life, Dexter has described his dark passenger as a controlled presence, something harnessed by Harry's design. After this night, that control becomes a performance. We see flashes of the act everywhere, a blood smear on a lab slide, that looks too much like that victim's face, a plastic curtain in a crime scene that ripples like his own kill room. Deborah's voice echoing a question that lands exactly on the moment he made that choice. He insists he is fine, even to himself, but the editing of his life is different now. Intrusive images cut in where the old narration used to be. This would be the start of a slow psychological unraveling. Dexter begins replaying the night in microscopic detail, not to learn from it, but to argue with it. He rewrites his own motives mid-thought, downgrades a selfish urge to kill into a necessary execution, then flinches when the memory refuses to cooperate. The long-term effects of this are subtle at first. A pause before a joke with Masuka, a hollow smile at Harrison, a moment where a victim's pleading overlaps with Deborah's voice in his head. The compartmentalization that once defined his life starts leaking. Paranoia grows in the spaces those leaks create. Dexter has always been cautious. Now he is suspicious. He replays conversations with Deborah frame by frame, searching for any hint that she discovered more than he intended to show her. A simple, "Where were you last night?" from a coworker becomes, in his mind, a veiled accusation. Batista's casual mention of a new Bay Harbor Butcher task force sounds like a death sentence. The more he fixates on their words, the less he trusts his own. To cope, he does the only thing he truly knows how to do. He doubles down on killing. New targets become emotional anesthetic, a way to drown out the one victim who will not stay buried in his memory. Each new plastic-wrapped body is framed as a return to the code, but the timing exposes the lie. He hunts faster, improvises more, accepts thinner evidence. The line between guilty and convenient outlet erodes, and Harry's rules start to sound like background noise rather than a governing law. This is the real horror the series leans into. Once Dexter chooses the urge to kill over any human connection, there is no stable version of him left to return to. Every new victim is also a cover story. Every justification a patch over the same rupture. The audience is no longer watching a careful vigilante maintain balance. We are watching a man spiral outward, dragging his sister, his coworkers, and eventually his son into the gravity of that one night. And in the next section, we're going to dive deep into how that spiral collides with the people who love him, forcing them to confront a truth that can no longer be managed or explained away. This is the night where the fantasy finally dies. The fantasy that Dexter is a controlled avenger, that the code still means something, that the people who love him are safer because he exists. Let's kick things off with the core elements that collide here. Dexter's victim is morally ambiguous, not a neatly packaged monster like Brian or Trinity, but a target chosen in a haze of rage and wounded pride. He makes a conscious choice to prioritize the kill over Deborah, walking away from her panic, her pleas, and her safety to feed the dark passenger. An innocent is put directly in harm's way as a result, not as a tragic side effect of a larger plan, but as collateral in Dexter's private war. And in the process, Harry's code isn't just bent, it is shattered in real time. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated the code as a kind of moral armor. It lets him say that his urges serve a higher purpose, that his victims deserve what happens on that table. On this night, every layer of that armor peels away. The kill is no longer about principle. It is about possession, anger, and the intoxicating thrill of control. Harry's old fears line up like charges in an indictment, loss of control, innocent collateral, and the possibility that Dexter might one day kill, not because he must, but because he wants to. This would be the start of Harry's worst nightmare fully materializing. Dexter ignores clear warning signs escalates his behavior in the face of emotional stress, and lets the dark passenger dictate the schedule. When Deborah bursts into that space and sees what he has chosen, the truth is no longer theoretical. Harry did not create a careful killer who protects the innocent. Harry created a man who, when pushed, will sacrifice anyone's safety for the chance to finish a kill. The long-term effects of this night are devastating. For Deborah, it is an event that changed her entire sense of reality. The brother she defended becomes the man who let her be endangered so he could satisfy an urge. Her panic attacks, her guilt, her eventual moral collapse all trace back to this breach. She doesn't just discover that Dexter is a serial killer, she discovers that, when forced to choose, he did not choose her. For Dexter, the damage is quieter but just as permanent. He can no longer convincingly narrate himself as a hero, even in his own head. Every later kill, every justification, is haunted by the memory of the night he chose pleasure over principle. From this point on, the audience is watching a man arguing with his own history, and that is why this act becomes the lens for everything that follows. Every later compromise, every endangered innocent, every broken relationship has to be read against the moment he proved what his priorities truly are. In the next part, we're going to dive deep into how the people around him absorb that truth, and what happens when the final person who matters refuses to look away. In the seconds after that kill room climax, the fantasy finally dies. Plastic sheets shiver with each breath Dexter takes. Blood pools in controlled, almost surgical lines across the floor, the way he always likes it, while a single drop breaks ranks and slides toward Deborah's shoe. The air is thick with bleach, copper, and something else now, the stunned, suffocating silence of someone who has just discovered the truth too late. Dexter stands at the center of it, knife still wet, face completely calm. For him, this is cleanup. Another necessary removal of a threat, another enemy of the code neatly processed and filed away. Throughout his life, Dexter has narrated these moments as victories over chaos, as proof that his dark passenger can be managed, that Harry's design still holds. Deborah, frozen in the doorway, is living an entirely different reality. For her, this is a moral free fall with no bottom. Let's kick things off with that contrast. Dexter adjusts the plastic, wipes a stray smear from his tools, and starts talking about why this kill had to happen, listing crimes, justifying, rationalizing. Deborah is not hearing a hero explaining justice. She is hearing a brother recite a script he has used on dozens of victims. The more methodical he becomes, the more terrifying it is. There is no visible remorse, no flinch at her tears, only irritation that the ritual has been interrupted. This is what makes this act more horrifying than any previous kill. In earlier seasons, the ritual was kept off-screen from those who loved him, cordoned away so the fantasy of good serial killer could survive. Here, Dexter prioritizes the ritual over the living person in the room. He finishes the cut before comforting her. He secures the body before reaching for her hand. That order of operations is a thesis statement. The kill comes first. Everything else is collateral. As Deborah's breathing turns ragged, the realization lands. The code was never a guarantee of safety. It was a story Harry told a damaged child, then a story Dexter told himself, and finally a story he sold to everyone who got too close. An event that changed the meaning of every holiday dinner, every inside joke at Miami Metro, every night he tucked Harrison into bed. All of it reframes, in an instant, as camouflage. Quick flashes from earlier seasons hit harder now. Dexter grilling in the backyard with Rita, Dexter making deadpan jokes with Masuka, Dexter throwing himself in front of danger for Deborah and calling it love. Those memories do not disappear. they curdle. If he can stand in front of Deborah, drenched in blood, and choose to keep killing anyway, what did any of those moments ever mean? Because that is the real apex of horror here. This is not just Dexter killing. This is Dexter choosing the kill over the person watching him. He hears her beg him to stop and continues binding, cutting, explaining. That choice defines who he really is, far more than any internal monologue about justice. The long-term effects of this fracture will ripple through every remaining relationship. But in this instant, the damage is already permanent. By the time the body is wrapped and the knife is clean, Deborah is not looking at a brother anymore, not a coworker, not a protector. She is staring at a stranger who has been wearing Dexter's face for years, and in the next section, we're going to dive deep into how that new identity spreads like a contagion through everyone left in his life. In that moment where Deborah sees the kill, the mask doesn't just fall off Dexter. The mask falls off the code itself. To understand why this act feels so terrifying, we're going to dive deep into how long the code had already been dying before that knife ever touched flesh. Let's kick things off with the early seasons, when Harry's rules seem absolute. Dexter stalks, gathers evidence, confirms guilt. The ice truck killer, the human traffickers, the pedophiles and rapists. On the surface, this is the fantasy Harry sold, a controlled outlet where the dark passenger only targets clear monsters. Throughout his life, Dexter repeats the mantra like scripture. Only the guilty. Never get caught. No emotional involvement. But this would be the start of a quieter story, a story about exceptions. The first cracks show when the evidence gets thinner. Dexter kills a murderous shrink based on coerced confessions and intuition more than hard proof. He goes after a gang member who feels dangerous, who fits the narrative, even as the paper trail looks shaky. Each time, the ritual stays the same, so the audience and Dexter both pretend the standard hasn't changed. Then come the personal vendettas. Brian, Miguel Prado, Leela, Trinity-related targets. These kills are not about plugging gaps in a broken justice system. They are about protecting Dexter's life, his secrets, his ego, his family. Harry's code, designed as a leash, becomes something Dexter learns to game. When his urges spike, he reframes the target. This person is a threat. This person might kill again. This person deserves it. The conclusion is decided first. The justification arrives later. By the time we reach the later seasons, the line between justice and gratification is almost gone. Dexter toys with some victims, drawing out their fear because it feels good. He hunts while knowing innocent people are exposed as collateral. Rita's death, Astor and Cody's trauma, Deborah's spiraling mental health, all trace back to moments where Dexter chose the hunt over safety. The long-term effects of each compromise expand the blast radius of his addiction. Harry's own horror confirms what the code really was. When Harry finally sees Dexter in a kill room and realizes the reality of what he trained his son to do, he doesn't see a noble vigilante. He sees an addict in full ritual, aroused by power and control. That is the event that changed everything for Harry, driving him to suicide and leaving Dexter with a ghost who preaches rules that no longer truly restrain him. So when Dexter's most recent victim stands on that plastic with ambiguous guilt, this is not an outlier. It is the logical endpoint of years of erosion. The standard of proof has been replaced by a feeling, a story that makes sense to Dexter in the moment. Anyone who fits the pattern, who threatens his narrative, can be recast as prey. If the code was the only barrier between Dexter and total predation, what does it mean that we've now watched him act without it? And, more unsettling, what does that say about every moral justification that made so many viewers comfortable following the dark passenger this far. If the code was the only barrier between Dexter and total predation, then the night of his most terrifying act is the moment that barrier finally snaps, not with a roar, but with a series of calm, incremental choices that place everyone else below the kill. Let's kick things off with the collateral damage. On that night, Dexter is not just stalking a target, he is dragging a whole ecosystem of innocence into the blast radius. Deborah is pulled into the orbit first, physically present, emotionally exposed, and completely unaware that Dexter's dark passenger has already decided that her safety is negotiable. Bystanders on the street, the responding officers, even the target's family waiting at home, all become background variables in Dexter's private equation of compulsion versus consequence. Throughout his life, Dexter told himself that Harry's code existed to prevent exactly this. Yet when the operation begins to spiral, he does not disengage. He accelerates. Traffic patterns, police response times, Deborah's mental state, the possibility of a stray bullet or a panicked suspect running into a crowd, all of it is registered, weighed, and then dismissed. Because abandoning the ritual would mean denying the urge to kill. Dexter's decision tree on this night is what makes it so chilling. At multiple points, he could walk away. When Deborah calls, begging for clarity, he could tell the truth and de-escalate. When patrol cars sweep the area, he could let the target go and live to hunt another day. Instead, he reroutes, lies, and improvises new angles, not to protect anyone, but to protect access to the victim. Every fork in the road becomes a test, and every time, he chooses the kill. The lie to someone he cares about is the clearest fracture. Dexter tells Deborah he is safe, that she should stand down, not because that protects her, but because her presence is now an obstacle between him and the table. This is no longer the protective brother juggling secrets to shield her from the truth. This is a predator managing a resource, trimming away emotional interference so the ritual can proceed uninterrupted. Emotionally, the balance has shifted. As the night tightens, there are flickers of fear and frustration, but they are swallowed by the thrill of proximity, the satisfaction of control, the relief when the plastic is finally pulled tight. The internal narration that once framed victims as necessary evils now reads like a junkie narrating a fix. The high of the hunt outweighs any imagined future with the people in his life. Earlier seasons showed Dexter going to extreme lengths to avoid collateral damage, even abandoning targets when innocents were at risk. That rule has been downgraded from absolute to optional, and optional quickly becomes expendable. The psychological terror here is simple. Someone who claims to love can calmly weigh that love against an addiction and choose the addiction. And the long-term effects of that choice will not stay contained to one blood-soaked room. They are about to reshape every relationship around him, forcing each person who discovers the truth to decide whether to cover for Dexter, confront him, or risk becoming his next collateral damage. That blood-soaked room becomes more than a crime scene. It becomes the altar where Dexter finally stops pretending. Up to this point, Harry's Code has always functioned as a story he tells himself about justice, about punishing monsters. Here, that story dies, and what replaces it is much simpler: pleasure. Let's kick things off with the kill itself. Dexter moves with a slow, unhurried precision, almost ceremonial as he lays out the tools. Checks the plastic, adjusts the tape. There is no frantic rush, no sense that this is a burden he has to shoulder. The camera holds on his face as he tests the blade with his thumb, and there is the slightest upward twitch at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile for the victim. A private acknowledgement to the dark passenger that dinner is served. Throughout his life, Dexter has narrated kills as necessary evils. You deserve this. This is justice. He has talked about Harry, about the code, about the evidence that proves his victims earned their fate. In this scene, that language evaporates. He does not list their crimes. He does not justify the choice. Instead, he leans in close and whispers something far more revealing. I've been waiting for this. No mention of guilt, only anticipation. We're going to dive deep into those silences because they are louder than any speech. Earlier iconic kills, like Brian or Trinity, are framed as moral crossroads. Dexter reminds himself that Brian wants to drag him beyond the code, that Trinity is a family annihilator who must be stopped. Even when he is lying, he is at least trying to believe he is a necessary evil. Here, he offers the victim nothing. No explanation, no accusation. The plastic rustles, the knife lifts, and he simply breathes out, almost content. The disconnect is chilling. The victim is shaking, begging, trying to understand what is happening, still reaching for some shared humanity. Dexter's eyes stay flat, steady, almost meditative. He tilts his head, studying the pulse in their neck the way a technician studies a machine. Their fear does not move him, it centers him. The more they panic, the calmer he becomes. The direction and sound design lock us into that predatory headspace. External noise drops away until all that remains is the dampened thud of the victim's heartbeat and the amplified sound of Dexter's breathing. The camera abandons wide shots of the room and clings instead to close-ups of his face, tracking every micro-expression as the blade goes in. There is a moment right after the first stab when his eyes briefly close, as if savoring the sensation. That is the most terrifying image in the entire sequence. This is the point where the audience can no longer comfortably root for him. The fantasy of ethical killing collapses. Because the truth has been discovered in real time, Dexter kills because he wants to. Harry's code was never a moral shield, only a channel, and this would be the start of an unraveling that reaches far beyond this table. If Dexter can enjoy murder this openly, what does that do to the people who have built their lives around believing he is capable of love, loyalty, or change? In the next section, the long-term effects of that choice begin to surface, as those closest to him are forced to confront whether they have been protecting a damaged man seeking control, or a predator who finally stopped pretending to be anything else. This is where the fantasy of control finally shatters. Up to this point, it is possible to believe Dexter's worst choice is an exception. But when the most terrifying act lands on someone Deborah loves, it becomes clear that no one in his orbit has ever been outside the blast radius. Let's kick things off with Deborah, because her reaction becomes the emotional anchor for everything that follows. She has defended Dexter in front of internal affairs, covered for his strange absences, and swallowed her own doubts in the name of family loyalty. When she finally grasps that he chose to kill rather than protect, that someone died because his dark passenger demanded it. The betrayal is total. It is not just shock. It is rage, grief, and the dawning horror that the brother she trusted has been quietly aiming a loaded weapon at her life the entire time. Throughout his life, Dexter has told Deborah partial truths, framed by Harry's code and his own need to be seen as trying. This would be the start of Deborah rereading every one of those moments. The childhood memories of a protective big brother, the adult compromises where she let him slide on evidence or attitude, all flip in retrospect. Each becomes a data point in a pattern where she has been enabling a predator, mistaking predation for damage control. The hugs after close calls, the late-night confessions, now feel like scenes where Dexter was checking how much she suspected, not seeking comfort. From there, the fracture ripples outward. Rita's memory, which Dexter has used as proof he can love, is retroactively poisoned. Her death already exposed how his secret life could kill someone innocent. This new act confirms it was never an accident of circumstance, but a fundamental hierarchy of priorities. Harrison's future starts to look less like a second chance and more like a ticking clock. Every scene of Dexter holding his son, teaching him, joking with him, now carries an undercurrent. If the urges spike high enough, even Harrison can be sacrificed to keep the secret. Coworkers like Batista and Masuka, who once saw Dexter as a quiet asset or comic foil, are pulled into the shadow without even knowing it. The knowledge or suspicion of who Dexter really is would retroactively infect every friendly banter, every shared case file. The trust they placed in his forensics work becomes terrifying. How many victims were misdirected? How many killers walked or died because Dexter needed the narrative to point away from him? The specific ways trust is broken go far beyond you kill people. For Deborah, it becomes, you chose killing over me, in the moment he prioritizes a target over her safety. It is, you lied when I was in danger, when she learns he withheld information that could have saved lives. It is, you used my love as cover for your addiction, as she realizes her faith in him gave his compulsion a shield inside the department. At this stage, everyone involved reaches for rationalizations. Deborah insists he only kills the guilty. Dexter leans on Harry's code, repeating that his victims deserve it. Even the audience is tempted to see this as a tragic slip, rather than an event that changed the moral equation. But after watching him cross a line where innocence becomes collateral, those defenses ring hollow. The long-term effects of this are brutal. From here on, every scene with Dexter and another person carries new tension, because the series has proven he is capable of sacrificing anyone if the dark passenger demands it. And that leads to an uncomfortable reflection. If the people who know Dexter best now see him as an existential threat, what does that say about the viewers who have spent entire seasons hoping he gets away with it? In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how the show turns that discomfort back on the audience, forcing a confrontation with complicity that is harder to escape than any kill room. That discomfort reaches its peak in the single most terrifying act Dexter ever commits, as it removes every excuse that has protected him in our minds. This is not his bloodiest kill or his closest call with the police. It is the moment he proves that, given a choice, he will sacrifice anyone, break any promise, and enjoy doing it. Let's kick things off with a quick recap of what actually happens in that scene. The victim is morally ambiguous, not a cartoonish monster who conveniently fits the code, but a human being whose guilt is murky enough that Harry's rules should have stopped the kill. Innocent people are actively endangered, not as collateral damage in a chaotic world, but because Dexter prioritizes feeding his dark passenger over protecting them. In the kill room, he takes clear pleasure in the ritual, savoring the fear, even as the code is broken in front of the audience. And when the truth is finally discovered by those closest to him, the trust that held his family together is shattered in a way that can never be repaired. To understand why this is the most terrifying, the criteria have to be clear. It is not about spectacle, gore, or body count. It is about how fully the act reveals Dexter's true nature and destroys the illusions that made him seem manageable. Throughout his life, the narrative has invited a comforting idea. Dexter is a controlled killer, a necessary monster, someone whose urges are contained by Harry's code and redirected toward deserving victims. This scene rips that frame away. In a single sequence, 3 truths arrive at once. First, the code is dead. It no longer functions as a boundary, only as a story Dexter tells to feel less monstrous. Second, love is exposed as conditional on his addiction. He does not protect family from the kill. He uses family, endangering and betraying them when the urge becomes too strong. Third, no one is safe from being sacrificed, not even Deborah, who once seemed like the one person he would never harm. That is what separates this from earlier headline moments, like the ice truck killer showdown, the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, or the public close calls with Dokes and Lagerta. In those arcs, Dexter still believed, or pretended, that he was serving a higher purpose, that his victims were the worst of the worst, that the consequences were tragic but necessary. Here, there is no higher purpose, just a man choosing the kill over every other part of his life. The horror is intimate and existential. It plays out in a small room between people who know each other, where family and loyalty are permanently rewritten from protection to potential prey. This would be the start of an event that changed how every later interaction is read. Because once that line is crossed, every hug, every apology carries the memory of the knife. For the audience, this is the scene that finally strips away the anti-hero label and leaves only a serial killer we have grown attached to. And that sets up the final question we're going to dive deep into next. What does it mean that a character like Dexter became beloved in the first place? And what does this reveal about a culture fascinated by monsters who look, talk, and love almost exactly like everyone else? So when that mask finally drops, it is not just a single event that changed one relationship. It is the culmination of a pattern that has been building throughout his life. Dexter has always been presented as a fantasy of control over chaos, a serial killer who follows a code, who kills only the guilty, who keeps the dark passenger on a leash. The illusion is that the monster can be managed, as long as the rules hold. But across the series, that control keeps eroding. Every time Dexter bends Harry's code for a personal grudge, every time innocent people are pulled into danger because he cannot walk away from a hunt, the fantasy cracks. The most terrifying act is not just the moment he finally chooses the urge to kill over any human connection. It is the realization that this would be the start of a version of Dexter, who no longer even pretends the code is about justice at all. The deeper unease comes from how easily everyone around him lives with that monster. Deborah, the detectives, even the audience, accept his story as long as the victims are framed as deserving and the worst horror stays off screen. As long as the blood slides stay hidden, as long as the narrative says the system failed and Dexter fixed it, the consequences feel distant. The show quietly asks how many red flags had to be ignored before the truth could no longer be denied. Throughout his life, Dexter survives because others decide that his usefulness outweighs their fear. Harry designs the code. Colleagues rely on his forensic skill. Loved ones cling to the version of him that makes them feel safe. The series weaponizes empathy by letting viewers hear his thoughts, understand his trauma, and root for his escapes. Then, in that most chilling choice, the story finally refuses to soften what he is. The anti-hero framing collapses, and what is left is a serial killer who enjoys the kill more than any idea of justice. In that sense, Dexter's most terrifying act becomes a mirror. It reflects how often destructive behavior is excused in real life when it comes wrapped in charm, competence, or a narrative that feels comforting. Monsters are most dangerous when they are useful, when they protect from other threats, when everyone is invested in believing they are different from the rest. So the challenge going forward is clear. Rewatch the key episodes where the code erodes, where innocents are endangered, where the dark passenger takes priority. And ask at what point the line from anti-hero to pure horror was crossed. Share in the comments which moment made that shift undeniable, and which character's discovery changed the way Dexter's life looked in hindsight. For more breakdowns that continue to dive deep into these questions of justice, complicity, and truth. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow the links on screen. In the end, the most terrifying thing Dexter ever did was not just what he did to them, it was what he revealed about everyone who ever hoped he would get away with it.